Hey there, and welcome back. If you are settling in now, perhaps with the lights low and something nearby, then come and sit with me for a while. Tonight's story is one I have been looking forward to telling. A map of lines and borders on paper, but the map that a fashionable person of 1815 London actually carried in their mind and their feet. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? And if you enjoy these cozy journeys through history, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Whether you're here to drift into sleep or to follow the currents of history, I'm glad you're with me. You are going to walk it. You are going to enter the shops. You are going to see where the famous people went and what they bought and where they were seen. By the end of the evening, you will know fashionable London the way a young woman who actually lived there in 1815 would have known it. You will be able to navigate it in the way someone who belongs there navigates it. Let me tell you what you are getting tonight, so that you can settle into it properly. You are visiting London, not the London of 2026, but the London of 1815, in the middle of the Regency period, 11 years after King George III's final descent into madness, 4 years after the Prince Regent took power, in the year, and indeed in the very month, when Wellington has defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. The battle was fought on the 18th of June. The dispatches reached London on the 21st, when Major Henry Percy, dust-covered and unshaven from his long ride through Belgium and through the Channel, walked into a ball at the Beau House in St. James's Square, carrying 2 captured French eagles, and laid them at the Prince Regent's feet. The newspapers have been full of nothing else since. The bells of every church in London have been ringing. The shops have hung victory banners. The price of every commodity that came across from the continent has dropped suddenly, as prices drop when a long uncertainty has been resolved. London in 1815 is the capital of an empire that has just survived its greatest military trial and emerged victorious, and the city is humming with that victory in a way that you can feel in the very air. The economy is strong. The fashionable season is at its peak. The streets are busy. The shops are full. The social calendar is crowded with balls and opera and theatre, and the 1,000 social rituals that fashionable London conducts with almost military precision. You are arriving in London at the moment when London is, arguably, at the peak of its Georgian elegance, and just before the great industrial transformations that will change the character of the city forever. The railway has not yet arrived. The factories are still small, and most of them are far away in the north and the Midlands. Coal smoke hangs over the rooftops, certainly, but the city itself is still recognisably the city that Dr. Johnson walked, that Boswell described, that the 18th century built brick by brick over the green fields north and west of the old medieval core. Tonight you are going to see what that city actually looked like to someone who lived in it. You are going to travel through it the way fashionable London actually travelled, by sedan chair through the early morning streets while the city is still quiet, by carriage through the shopping avenues at the fashionable hour, on foot when the journey is short and the company is known, by carriage again in the late afternoon, and home through the gaslit streets in the dark of midnight after the opera. You will see the city from inside the controlled spaces that fashionable London created for itself, the great shops of Bond Street and Piccadilly, the parks where the fashionable rode and walked, the famous confectioners and publishers and auction houses that were the nodes of fashionable life. You will not go to the poor districts. You will not see the crowded courts and alleys where the working people lived. You will see, instead, the curated geography of Mayfair and St. James's and the West End, the world that fashionable London saw when it looked out from its windows and went about its daily business. This is the world of the visitor, and it is a carefully managed world. And tonight, You are going to see it exactly as it would have been seen by someone arriving in London from the country for the first time, being shown the way by someone who knows it intimately. And you are going to see it in the company of people. Byron may walk past Hatchard's on Bond Street while you are looking at the books. Brummell will be on horseback in Hyde Park in the late afternoon, the figure who defined the fashion of the age, now nearing the end of his ascendancy, though he does not quite know it yet. The Prince Regent's carriage will pass on its way through the park, or along Pall Mall toward Carlton House. Caroline Lamb may be somewhere in the Opera House later, the figure who 3 years ago publicly declared her ruinous infatuation with Byron, and who is at this moment being kept, more or less, on a tighter rein by her exhausted husband. The great singers of the Italian opera will be in the theatre when you arrive for the evening's performance. You will not speak to any of these people. You will simply be, briefly, in the same paved square, or the same shop, or the same stretch of street, and you will see them the way anyone in London in 1815 might have seen them, in a glimpse, in a passing, in the casual way that the famous people of an age become visible to the ordinary people around them. Al-Qaid. So, settle in. You have arrived in London 3 days ago. Your aunt has spent the last 4 decades learning the map of this city. Today she is going to teach it to you. The morning is coming. The sedan chair will be at the door at 8:30. Let us go. Let me set the scene for you. The year is 1815. The month is June. You have arrived in London 3 days ago from Hampshire, from your father's parsonage, from a life that has been, until this point, almost entirely confined to a radius of perhaps 10 miles. The journey to London took 2 days by post-chaise, an enclosed carriage hired at the inn at Winchester, drawn by 2 horses that were changed every 10 miles or so at the posting houses along the road, with a postillion riding the lead horse rather than a coachman sitting on a box, which is the manner in which a hired carriage is properly managed in 1815. You set out from Winchester at 6 in the morning of the first day. You broke the journey at Basingstoke for the changing of the horses, then again at Bagshot for a hasty dinner of cold mutton and bread and ale, then again at Staines and Brentford, as the road thickened with the accumulation of traffic that announces the approach of London. You spent the first night at the Black Bear in Staines, in a clean room above the yard, with the sound of horses being changed beneath your window through most of the night. You set out again at dawn. The second day was shorter but slower, the road thicker, the inns more frequent and busier, the country gradually becoming less recognisable as country. You crossed Hounslow Heath in the late morning, that flat exposed waste where highwaymen used to keep their watch in your aunt's youth. You came in through Knightsbridge in the middle of the afternoon, past the turnpike gate, and into the long approach down what was now becoming the genteel new neighbourhood of Belgravia, though the great squares had not yet been built, and most of the land was still in market gardens and farms. You turned up Park Lane along the eastern edge of Hyde Park. You turned into the streets of Mayfair. The post-chaise drew up outside a tall, narrow house in Brook Street, and a footman in green livery came down the steps to help you out. And that, 3 days ago, was your arrival in London. You have never been to a city before. You have never seen more than 100 people gathered in one place at a time. You have never eaten food you did not recognise. You have never walked streets that stretched beyond sight. The smell of London hit you before you had even left the carriage, the smell of coal smoke, of horse manure on the cobbles, of the river not so very far off, of the smaller breath of 700,000 people living closely together. The noise of London hit you next. The rumble of carriage wheels on stone, the shouts of street traders, the calls of the hackney coachman, the bells of the city churches, each ringing on its own private schedule. the accumulating roar of a city about its business. And then the scale, the buildings tall on either side of every street, the roof lines unbroken for hundreds of yards, the sheer brick weight of a city that had been building itself for 2,000 years and had not paused recently in the building. Your aunt, now elderly, still living, still sharp, still the keeper of all the knowledge of London that a person can accumulate across a long life, has taken you into her house in Brook Street, Mayfair. The house is tall and narrow, 4 stories tall above the basement kitchens, typical of the Georgian terraces that line the squares and streets of Mayfair. It was built in 1729, in the great early Georgian wave of building that filled Mayfair after the Grosvenor estate was developed, and it has been altered by every successive generation of inhabitants, but never replaced. Your aunt and her husband bought it in 1773 on the occasion of their marriage when she was 23 and he was 41, and they paid £1,800 for it, which was a substantial price at the time, but a price that her husband, a successful merchant in the East India trade, was perfectly able to find. She has lived in this house with one short interruption for the year they spent in Bath after the children were born, for 42 years. You are in the upper guest bedroom, looking out over the walled garden at the back. The bedroom is on the 2nd floor, with 2 tall sash windows that look down into a square of grass and gravel, and a single old fig tree that has been there longer than the house. The room is papered in pale yellow with a pattern of leaves. There is a 4-poster bed with white muslin curtains, a dressing table with a looking glass and a silver hairbrush set, a washstand with a porcelain basin and ewer, a chest of drawers in mahogany, a writing desk in the corner, a chair, and a thick Turkey carpet on the floor. There are 3 pictures on the walls, a landscape of the Vale of Pewsey that your aunt's husband bought from a young artist 40 years ago, a flower piece like the Dutch school, and a framed engraving of the Pantheon in Rome. The room speaks of comfort, of money, but not display, of a long-established household that has settled into its arrangements and seen no reason to change them. You have been sleeping badly. You have been overwhelmed by the strangeness of everything, the noise of the city even at night, the smell of coal smoke and horse manure, and the accumulated organic life of a city of 700,000 people, the sheer scale of the buildings around you, the strangeness of being attended by servants you have not previously known, the strangeness of a household run on a clock different from the clock of the parsonage. At home in Hampshire, the household rose at 6 and was at breakfast by 7:30 and at the day's work by 8. Here in Brook Street, breakfast is not until 9, and the principal meal of the day is dinner at 7:30 in the evening, which is several hours later than dinner is taken at home. The servants have been quietly explaining these arrangements to you. The maid who attends you, a young woman of perhaps 20 named Mary, has been kind and patient, but the strangeness has not yet worn off. You have lain awake the past 3 nights, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a city, and you have begun to wonder, in the dark hours, whether you will ever feel at home in this place. Your aunt has noticed. She has watched you around the dinner table for 3 evenings now. She has seen the way you have looked at the food, at the rooms, at her servants. She has seen the bewilderment of a young woman who has not yet found her bearings. And on the morning of your 4th day in London, she comes to your room before breakfast and tells you, in her way, that today is the day she is going to teach you the map, not the geographical map, but the social map, the map of where fashionable London goes, what fashionable London buys, where fashionable London is seen, the map that, once you understand it, will make the city legible instead of bewildering. She tells you there will be much walking. She tells you there will be many names of streets, of shops, of people you will see but not meet. She tells you that by the end of the day, you will have been to perhaps 20 different places, seen perhaps 30 different streets, encountered perhaps 10 of the famous people who define the social life of London. She tells you to eat a good breakfast. She tells you to wear your second best dress, not your best, because you will be walking and the streets are dusty, and she does not want you to ruin your good muslin. She tells you to wear walking shoes, not slippers. She tells you that the sedan chairs will arrive at 8:30, and the day will begin. You dress with the help of Mary. Your second best dress is a pale blue muslin with a high waist in the fashion of the moment, the bodice cut close, the skirt falling straight to just above the ankle, the sleeves long and tight to the wrist. Over the dress you put a spencer, a short jacket cut to the waist made of darker blue wool, that buttons up the front. Your bonnet is straw, trimmed with a blue ribbon, with a brim that comes forward over your face, in the fashion of the year. Your gloves are pale kid leather, your stockings are white cotton, your shoes are flat slippers of leather, intended for indoor wear. But Mary brings you, at your aunt's instruction, a pair of stouter walking shoes of black leather that lace up at the front. And these are the ones you put on. You look at yourself in the long looking glass on the back of the wardrobe door. You look, you think, like a clergyman's daughter from Hampshire, dressed as carefully as her circumstances permit, which is to say, not in the latest London fashion, but in last year's London fashion, as it has filtered down to the country milliners. It will have to do. You go down to breakfast at 8 o'clock. Breakfast is laid in the breakfast room on the ground floor at the back of the house, with windows looking out over the same garden you can see from your bedroom upstairs. The room is panelled in a fawn colour, with a fireplace and a round mahogany table that seats 6. The table has been laid with a white cloth and a breakfast service in the new Wedgwood pattern, with a silver teapot and coffee pot at the head of the table, a silver milk jug, a sugar bowl with silver tongs for the loaf sugar that is broken from the cone in the kitchen and brought to the table in irregular lumps. There is tea made in the Indian fashion that is now standard throughout fashionable England, the leaves brought from China by way of the East India Company's regular cargoes. There is coffee, ground that morning from beans that came up from the docks in the previous week. There is toast in a silver toast rack, the slices cut thin and grilled on a long fork before the kitchen fire by the undercook. There is butter in a Worcester porcelain dish, fresh from the dairy at the back of Covent Garden Market that morning. There is marmalade, made in the household 6 months ago from the bitter Seville oranges that come over from Spain in the late winter. There is cold ham, sliced thin, on a Worcester platter. There are fresh white rolls, brought hot from the bakery in Brook Street that opens at 6 in the morning. There is a glass dish of strawberry preserve. There is at your aunt's place a boiled egg in a silver egg cup, which she takes most mornings. The food is better than the food at home in Hampshire. Everything in London, so far, has been better in some way, more refined, more careful, more considered. The tea is fresher, the butter is sweeter, the bread is lighter. Even the marmalade, which your aunt's housekeeper made in her own kitchen, has a different character from the marmalade you knew at home, which was always burned at the bottom of the pan because your mother's cook insisted on cooking it too long. You eat slowly, paying attention. Your aunt along the table takes her tea with milk and a lump of sugar. She eats half a slice of toast with butter, the egg, a thin slice of ham. She drinks 1 cup of coffee at the end. She does not speak much during breakfast. She is, you have noticed throughout the past 3 days, a woman who husbands her words and her energy in the morning. The conversation will come later. You finish at 8 o'clock. You go through to the front parlour, which looks out over Brook Street, and you wait, watching the street below. Brook Street at this hour is already busy. There are tradesmen's carts unloading at the area gates of the houses opposite. The baker's boy with a long basket. The milk girl with 2 churns slung from a wooden yoke across her shoulders. The coal merchant's man with sacks of best Newcastle. There is a maidservant from one of the houses in the way, sweeping the front steps with a stiff broom and a pail of water. There is a gentleman returning home in evening dress from some night's entertainment, walking unsteadily, his cravat undone, supported by a friend in similar condition. There are sparrows in the gutters of the roofs opposite. There is, in the mews behind the houses on the south side, the sound of a horse being walked out into the lane, ready to be put in the carriage that will be needed in an hour or two. At exactly 8:30 you see the sedan chairs arrive. There are 2 of them, as there would have been in your aunt's younger London, when the world was a very different place. They are painted in dark green with brass fittings, in the colour scheme of one of the better London chair hire establishments. The body of each chair is an enclosed wooden box, just large enough for one seated passenger, with a window of glass on either side, and a hinged door at the front that opens outward. 2 long poles run through brass sockets on either side of the chair, and the 2 chairmen stand one at the front and one at the back, lifting the poles to shoulder height and walking with the chair held between them at a carrying pace. The chairmen are dressed in green livery, short coats, white stockings, buckled shoes, round caps, clean and neat in the style of professional chairmen of the better sort. There is a torch-bearer with them, a boy of about 14 in clean linen, who carries a staff with a wax flambeau ready to be lit if the journey runs into the dusk, though at this hour of the morning he will not need it. Your aunt comes down the stairs. She is dressed in a morning gown of pale grey silk, with a high waist and long sleeves, and over it a pelisse of darker grey wool. The pelisse is the half-coat, half-dress garment of the fashionable woman from that era, fitted close to the body and falling to the ankle, buttoned up the front with a row of silver buttons. Her bonnet is grey straw trimmed with grey and white ribbons. Her gloves are pale grey kid. Her stockings are white silk. Her shoes are flat black slippers of kid leather, much softer than yours. She carries a silk reticule on a cord over her wrist, the drawstring bag in which fashionable women carried their handkerchiefs, their smelling salts, their visiting cards. Around her neck on a thin gold chain is an enamel locket that contains, you happen to know, a miniature of her dead husband. She looks in the morning light coming through the tall windows of her hall like a woman who has done this journey 100 times and enjoys it still. She tells you, as you step toward the door, that the first place you are going is not the shops. The first place is the park. You cannot understand fashionable London without understanding the park. The park is where London sees itself and is seen. The park is the stage. The shops, she tells you, are merely where you go to perform what you have learned in the park. You step out into Brook Street. The morning is cool and soft. The light is still in that state of early morning when the sun is just clearing the horizon and the whole city has the appearance of something not yet fully awake. The air smells of coal smoke from the breakfast fires of 500,000 houses, of horse manure in the street, and the effort of someone with a broom and bucket trying to keep up with it, of the river not so far off, of the bakery at the corner of Davy Street, of the early flowers in the front garden of the house opposite, where someone has taken great care over the roses. The cobbles of the street are damp from the cleaners, who came round in the dark before dawn, and the gutters are clear. The whole of Mayfair has the composed appearance of a neighbourhood where money is spent on keeping the surface of life In order, the chairmen lift the poles. The torchbearer takes his place at the front. Your aunt is in the first chair. You climb into the second. The interior of the chair is carefully fitted. A padded seat covered in dark green velvet, a velvet cushion at your back, a strap above the door for holding onto, a mirror let into the panelling on one side, a pocket on the other side for a fan or a handkerchief. The chair is lifted. There is a swaying movement as the chairmen find their balance, and then the procession begins to move down Brook Street toward Hanover Square, and beyond it toward Piccadilly and the parks. The journey from Brook Street to the gates of Green Park takes perhaps 15 minutes by sedan chair, the chairman moving at a walking pace that is faster than a person on foot, but slower than a horse at the trot. The chairmen carry you through the morning streets of Mayfair, down toward Bond Street, then across into the larger streets that lead out to Piccadilly. You watch through the side window of the chair as the streets go past. You see the brick fronts of the Mayfair houses, almost all of them now 80 or 90 years old, brick with stone dressings, sash windows, white painted door cases, with fanlights above the doors. You see the iron railings in front of each house, painted black, with the gates in them giving access to the area below the pavement where the kitchens and the servants' quarters are. You see, through the windows of one of the houses, a maid laying a fire. You see, through another window, a footman polishing a silver coffee pot at a table by the window for the better light. There are servants going about their early morning business, crossing to the market with baskets, sweeping the front steps of houses, carrying water from the pump at the corner. There are a few early riders on horses, heading toward Hyde Park for the morning ride before the fashionable hour begins. There are dustmen with their carts, collecting the ash from the household fires that will be sold on for use in brick making and other industries that take wood ash and coal ash as a feedstock. There is a man with a long pole on his shoulder calling out his trade in a sing-song voice, a chimney sweep, with a soot-blackened boy walking behind him, the boy who will go up the narrow flues. There is the clatter of a milkmaid's pattens on the cobbles. There is, in a quieter side street as you cross, the sound of someone playing a flute very softly through an open upper window, practicing perhaps before the day's work begins. The city is waking up, slowly, in the way of an 18th century city beginning its working day, and from inside the sedan chair, lifted up to shoulder height and carried gently through the morning, you have the strange sense of being briefly detached from the world you are watching, suspended in your green velvet box above the ordinary level at which life is lived. It is, you find, an oddly pleasant sensation. You can see the town, but the town cannot quite see you. The chair gives you a protected position from which to begin your education. You arrive at the gates of Green Park. The gates are simple, wrought iron, without the grandeur of the more famous gate at Hyde Park's Grosvenor Gate that you will see later in the day. Green Park is, in the hierarchy of fashionable London, less fashionable than Hyde Park. It is smaller, quieter, more for the serious walker than for the great public promenade. It has been a royal park since the reign of Charles II, when it was enclosed as part of the chain of royal parks linking St. James's Palace with Hyde Park, and it has remained largely undeveloped since. There are no great avenues, no formal flower beds, no built features beyond the garden buildings that successive monarchs have raised, and that successive monarchs have allowed to fall into pleasant disrepair. The park has its own character, however, and at this hour of the morning it has a beauty. The chairman set you down at the gate. Your aunt steps out of her chair, and you step out of yours. She speaks to the head chairman, a man of about 40 named Wilson, who has worked for one of the better chair hire houses for 15 years and whom your aunt has used on perhaps 200 occasions. She tells him that she will want the chairs again at 9:30 at the gate. He touches his cap. The chairmen pick up the empty chairs and carry them back out into Piccadilly, where they will wait or take another fare in the meantime. The torchbearer goes with them. The two of you are alone at the gate of Green Park. You step into the park together. The grass is still damp with dew. The trees are all in full leaf, the heavy green of June, a tired green now that the freshness of May has gone, but the deeper exhaustion of August has not yet arrived. There is almost no one here at this hour. A few servants walking dogs, a man reading a newspaper on a bench, an elderly woman sitting alone, looking out at the view, a nursemaid with a child in a long white smock, the child running in uncertain circles on the grass, while the nursemaid watches with the patient, unfocused attention of a woman who has watched many children run in many circles. Two soldiers in red coats walking slowly down the path, with the air of men who have been on night duty and are now strolling home before sleep. The whole park has the quality of a space that has not yet been claimed by the fashionable and therefore retains something of its own character. Your aunt walks slowly. She walks, she tells you, every morning when she is in London, if the weather permits. Sometimes she walks alone. Sometimes she meets friends here, other widows, other women of her age who have the morning free. They walk. They sit on the benches. They talk about the news and the social events of the evening before. It is one of her rituals. It is one of the reasons she has remained in London after her husband died. The park is one of the fixed points of her week, one of the certainties around which she has organized her life, and she comes to it, not because she expects anything important to happen, but because the act of coming has itself become a kind of prayer. She points out, as you walk the geography of the park, there is the lake, only recently opened up. They have begun the project of converting the old straight canal that the second Charles dug in the 1660s into something more naturalistic, with a rounded shore and irregular banks, and the impression of a real piece of water rather than an engineered ornament. The work is not yet finished, and will not be finished for another 15 years. There are the trees, most of them planted 100 years ago or more, the oaks and the limes and the great planes that have grown to their full height and stand now in the majesty of mature park trees. There is the open view toward Westminster, toward the new Parliament buildings and the great medieval bulk of the Abbey beyond them. There is the suggestion of fields beyond the park. Although the city is encroaching, there are new houses being built on the south side, along Constitution Hill, and the open country that used to come right up to the park boundary is now broken up by the spreading West End. The character of the view, your aunt says, has changed in the past 20 years. There used to be cows in the park, kept by the dairy that supplied milk to the great houses round about. The cows have been removed within living memory. The sense of a piece of working country has been replaced by the sense of an ornamental garden. Whether this is improvement or loss, your aunt does not say. She gives you the fact and lets you draw your own conclusion. You walk for perhaps 40 minutes. You pass only a few people. The morning is mild, but not hot. The birds are singing. The song thrush in the hawthorn at the corner of the path, the wren in the thick hedge at the edge of the lake, the cooing of the wood pigeons in the high branches of the oaks. Your aunt talks, in her way, about what she has observed in the park over the years. She has watched fashions change. She has watched people grow old. She has watched the city grow up around the park. She has watched young women arrive, like you, from the country, bewildered by the scale of everything. She has watched those same women, years later, walking the park with confidence, knowing exactly where they belong, She has watched her own friends become old. She has watched her own children become adults and leave London and become themselves the parents of children whom she now scarcely sees. She has watched her own husband, in the last year of his life, walk this park with a stick at her side, more slowly than he had ever walked anywhere. She remembers the bench where they sat one afternoon in October of the year 1799, when he had been complaining of pains in his chest for some weeks, and she had asked him whether he ought to consult Dr. Heberden again, and he had said, in his way, that he thought it was probably no longer a question of consulting anyone. He died 7 months later, in his own bed in Brook Street, with her holding his hand. The bench is still there, third along from the gate on the left-hand side as you walk into the park. She does not point it out to you, but you can tell, from the slowing of her pace as you pass it, that she has not forgotten. By the time you emerge from the park at the upper gate that opens into Piccadilly opposite the bottom of Half Moon Street, the sun is fully up and the city is beginning to wake in earnest. It is nearly 9 o'clock. The fashionable hour for shopping does not begin until 11, your aunt explains. But there is time to see the city preparing itself. There is time to understand the rhythm. The shops are opening their shutters. The first delivery carts of the day are unloading. The first servants of the day are out on errands for their mistresses, with lists in their pockets and the purposeful walk of women who know exactly what they have to do. She directs the chairmen who have been waiting at the gate as instructed to take you slowly down Piccadilly toward Hyde Park Corner and then back up again. As you are carried, she points out, in her way, the buildings and the shops that line the street. Piccadilly, in 1815, is one of London's major commercial streets, with a peculiar character, half aristocratic residential frontage, half fashionable retail parade. On the north side, you pass the long fronts of important private houses, Devonshire House, where the Cavendish political dynasty has its London seat, set back from the street behind a high wall and a large forecourt. Then the smaller frontages of the lesser private houses. Then Burlington House, the Palladian palace of the Earls of Burlington, which has been bought a few years ago by Lord George Cavendish, and which is currently being remodelled inside. Then the line of fashionable shops that runs east from there to the edge of the West End. On the south side, you pass the grass and trees of Green Park, then the smaller frontages of the buildings that face the park, then the imposing fronts of the clubs and houses that look down toward St. James's Palace. There is the facade of the great houses of the aristocracy, with their tall first-floor reception-room windows and the attic windows up under the eaves where the servants sleep. There is the beginning of the retail district. There is Hatchard's, the famous bookshop, which you will visit later. There is a jeweller with a discreet gold-painted sign and a single tray of objects in the window. There is a print shop, the windows full of the latest political caricatures by Gilray and Cruikshank and Rowlandson, biting savage drawings of the Prince Regent in his fat magnificence and Napoleon in his sudden recent humiliation. There is a confectioner, there is an apothecary, with the great glass jars in the window in green and red and blue, full of coloured water lit from behind by a candle, so that they glow in the early morning shadow of the street. There is a music shop, with the latest sheet music in the window, the new operas, the new songs, the simple piano pieces that fashionable young women learn for the drawing-room. You notice, as you pass, how carefully the shop fronts are arranged, how the windows are dressed. How much calculation goes into the presentation of goods. This, she says, is an education. The shops of London are not merely places of transaction. They are places of spectacle. They are where women come not just to buy, but to be seen buying. The window display is a recent invention, perhaps 30 years old as a serious commercial art, and the better London shops have brought it to a level that no other city in Europe has yet achieved. Even the second-rate shops of Piccadilly understand that the window is a daily theatre, and they dress it accordingly. The first-rate shops, your aunt says, treat the window the way the Royal Academy treats the summer exhibition, as an annual demonstration of the highest art they are capable of. The chairmen carry you further down Piccadilly, past the turning of Sackville Street, past the great frontage of the Albany, the converted former private mansion that has just been opened as bachelor chambers for fashionable young men, where Lord Byron himself has rooms, and on toward the place where Piccadilly meets the Haymarket and the streets that run down towards St. James's Palace. This place is not yet a circus in the modern sense. That will not happen until decades later, when the great street improvements of the 1820s and 30s reshape the whole arrangement, but is simply the place where several great streets converge in the rough triangular space that the 18th century left as the shape of the road junction. Your aunt points out the turning towards St. James's Street, where the great clubs are. She tells you that you cannot go there as a woman. The street is, in social terms, almost as closed to you as if there were a gate across it with a porter to keep women out. But you will walk past. You will see the outside. You will understand, from looking at the facades, something about the world of fashionable men. By 10 o'clock, the shopping hour is beginning. The chairmen turn the chairs around in the wide place where Piccadilly meets the head of the Haymarket and carry you back up Piccadilly toward Bond Street. This is the moment, she explains, when fashionable London emerges. This is when the ladies begin their morning shopping. This is when the great promenade begins. The streets in the past hour have changed character. The early servants have gone back to their houses, their morning errands done. The early carts have unloaded and gone away. In their place you begin to see the ladies, at first one or two, then clusters, then the stream of well-dressed women in their morning dresses and their pelisses and their bonnets, walking with the pace that is the proper pace for fashionable shopping, accompanied in some cases by a maid carrying a parcel or a book, in other cases by a friend, in other cases alone. The chairmen carry you up to the bottom of Old Bond Street and set you down at the corner. Your aunt dismisses them once again. She will call for them at 1 o'clock at her friend's house in Grosvenor Square, where you will be at lunch. She and the chairman seem to have a perfect understanding. Wilson nods, touches his cap, and the chairs are carried away. Bond Street at 10:30 on a summer morning in 1815 is one of the great sights of London. The street is lined with shops, 4 stories high, with facades and well-dressed windows. There are perhaps 50 other people on the street at this moment, some shopping, some simply walking, some standing still and talking, some sitting in their carriages drawn up at the curb while their footmen go into the shops to fetch out the goods that have been ordered. The men are in their morning coats and their hats, the coat cut close to the body in the new fashion, the breeches replaced now in the daytime with the new long pantaloons that go down to the boots, the hat the tall stovepipe of the year, the cravat tied in one of the number of acceptable knots, the gloves of pale leather, the cane of slim black wood with a silver or ivory head. The women are in their morning dresses and their bonnets and their pelisses. Everyone is carefully dressed. Everyone is carefully observed. Your aunt takes your arm, and the two of you begin to walk down the street slowly, the processional pace that is the only proper pace on Bond Street at this hour. She points out as you walk the principal shops, and you begin to understand that Bond Street is not a single street but a system, an arrangement of establishments, each of which has its own social standing and its own set of patrons and its own function in the life of fashionable London. And here at number 173 Piccadilly, though it presents itself with one foot on Bond Street, is Hatchard's, where Byron sometimes comes to browse the new books, and where the evangelical wing of the great families comes to buy improving literature, and you will go in shortly. Here at 14 New Bond Street is Hookham's circulating library, where a paid membership lets you borrow novels, 3 guineas the year for a country account, 4 for a town one, with the right to take out 3 volumes at a time. Here at 23 Old Bond Street is Truefitt and Hill, the hairdresser, established by James Truefitt 10 years ago in 1805 and already famous, the establishment to which the sons of the great families come for their first proper shave at 16. Here, in Jermyn Street just round the corner from Bond Street, is Floris, the perfumer, founded by a young Spaniard from Minorca in 1730, and now, in its 3rd generation of family management, the smell of their flowers and oils drifting out onto the pavement when the door opens. The narrow shop interior, with its bottles arranged on the long mahogany counters in the order in which they are most often called for. Here at 6th and James's Street is Lock & Co., the hatter, established in 1676, and one of the oldest shops in London, where the Prince Regent himself buys his hats. Where the Duke of Wellington bought the cocked hat that he wore at Waterloo 3 weeks ago, the hat is presumably still with him in Paris, but it was bought here. Your aunt names them, and to each name she adds a piece of information that you will need if you are to understand the social geography of the street. The shop where the Prince Regent buys his hats is not the same as the shop where Lord Byron buys his hats. Byron uses Lock as well, as it happens, but the 2 men patronize the same establishment for entirely different reasons and on entirely different terms. The shop where Mrs. Fitzherbert orders her bonnets, Mrs. Fitzherbert being the Catholic widow whom the Prince of Wales secretly married in 1785 in defiance of every law of church and state. A marriage that has been disavowed and reaffirmed and disavowed again through the past 30 years, is not the same as the shop where the present Princess of Wales orders hers. To know which shop is patronised by whom is to know, in a real sense, who matters at any given moment in fashionable London. You pass the turning towards St. James's Street. Your aunt indicates with a gesture the street itself. At number 37, she tells you, is White's, the oldest and most exclusive of the gentlemen's clubs, founded as a chocolate house in 1693, and now well into its 2nd century of selectiveness about its membership. At 60 is Brooks's, the great Whig club, where the political opposition to the present Tory government congregates, and where the late great Charles James Fox played at faro for stakes that ruined 3 generations of his descendants. At 28 is Boodle's, the country gentlemen's club, less politically charged than the others. At 81 Piccadilly itself is Wattier's, the club where Brummell himself comes to gamble, a club founded only in 1807 by the Prince Regent's chef, and already, 8 years later, the most fashionable gambling club in London, and the place where more substantial fortunes have been lost over the green tables in the past 5 years than in any other establishment in the capital. You cannot, as a woman, enter any of these places. You will never see the inside of any of them. But you can walk past and see the facades and imagine the world inside, the world of leather armchairs and silver-framed mirrors and old port, and the endless rituals of male association. The whole of 1/2 of fashionable London is conducted behind those facades. The political deals are made there. The marriages are arranged there. The fortunes are won and lost there. And you, as a woman, will spend your whole life knowing about it from the outside. At number 13 Bond Street, your aunt stops. Here, she tells you, is something more interesting still. The building looks at first glance like all the other buildings on the street. A narrow Georgian house, 4 stories high, of yellow London brick with stone dressings, with sash windows and a plain front door. But upstairs, at this address, are 2 establishments that between them educate the bodies of fashionable male London. Downstairs and on the first floor is Gentleman Jackson's boxing rooms, presided over by John Jackson, who was the bare-knuckle champion of England from 1795 until his retirement, and who has, in the years since, become the most fashionable boxing instructor in London. Above that, on the second floor, is Angelo's Fencing Academy, run by Henry Angelo, the son of the great Domenico Angelo, who came to London from Italy in the 1750s and who effectively introduced the modern method of fencing instruction to the English aristocracy. Both establishments are famous. Both are patronised by the fashionable young men of London. Byron, she notes, trains at both. He goes to Jackson to box and to Angelo to fence. He has been writing in his letters, which she has seen quoted in the morning papers, that he considers Jackson the emperor of pugilism, and that he attends the academy as often as the rest of his complicated life will allow. If you come at the right time of day, your aunt says you might see him coming out of the building. You stand on the pavement in front of number 13 and look up at the building. It is a narrow Georgian house, 4 stories high, like all the houses on Bond Street. The windows are quite plain. There is no advertisement of what happens inside, no painted signboard, no display of equipment in the lower window. There is on the wall beside the door a brass plate with the words J. Jackson, Professor, engraved in modest capitals, and beside it another plate that reads H. Jackson, Angelo, Master at Arms. The plates are recently polished. Above the door, on the bricks, is an iron bracket from which a lantern hangs at night. Since the gentlemen of fashion who use these rooms often come and go in the dusk after a long day of more public engagements. But there is nothing else to suggest that inside, on the upper floors of this narrow ordinary house, some of the most famous physical training in England takes place. Your aunt, looking at the building, seems to see something you do not. She seems to see the young men inside, stripped to the waist, training with their gloves and their foils. She seems to know something of the world inside those windows. She tells you that John Jackson is now in his late 40s, a powerfully built man of about 5'11", broad in the shoulders and the chest, who walks the streets of London with the upright bearing of a man who has spent his life on the perfect maintenance of his own physical condition. He was born the son of a master builder in Worcester, came to London as a young man, fought his first prize fight at the age of 19, became champion of England in 1795 by defeating Daniel Mendoza in 9.5 minutes at Hornchurch in Essex, and retired 3 years later to open his academy. He charges, your aunt says, 2 guineas the lesson, which is a substantial sum, but the gentlemen who come to him pay it gladly. What they get is not merely instruction in the technique of boxing, which can be picked up cheaply enough from any prize fighter in London. What they get is the systematic training of the body that Jackson has developed across 20 years. The working of the shoulders, the back, the legs, the building of stamina, the development of speed, the precise shaping of the body that the new Regency fashion in male dress requires. The new tight coats and the new long pantaloons reveal the male figure in a way that male dress has not done since the close-fitting hose of the 16th century. A gentleman who wishes to look well in his clothes must look well out of them. And the body that looks well out of clothes is the body that has been worked by Jackson. The fencing master upstairs is Henry Angelo, the son of Domenico, who has been writing for years on the theory of fencing, and who is generally considered, even by the French masters, the most learned theoretician of the small sword in Europe. He charges, your aunt thinks, less than Jackson, perhaps 30 shillings the lesson, but his clientele is similarly distinguished. The two establishments share the same building because the late Domenico Angelo and Jackson's predecessor in the boxing rooms found, 15 years ago, that they had the same clientele in different parts of the day, and they made the obvious arrangement. She tells you that Byron was here yesterday, according to the morning gossip that circulates among the fashionable ladies of her acquaintance. He comes usually at 11 in the morning to box with Jackson. Then he stays to fence with Angelo for an hour. Then he goes home to Piccadilly Terrace, where he lives with his new wife of 6 months. If the two of you come back at precisely that time, there is a possibility that you might see him. Not meet him. He would not notice a country clergyman's daughter on a London pavement, and you would not approach him even if he did. But see him briefly, coming out of the building or going in, and what that glimpse will give you is the real fact of having been in the same physical space as one of the most famous men in England. You ask her why she thinks this matters. Why it matters to see Byron going into a boxing academy. She considers this question carefully. She tells you that it matters because Byron, at this moment in 1815, is perhaps the most famous man in London. His poetry is the poetry that the fashionable world reads. The first 2 cantos of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, published 3 years ago, sold 10,000 copies in their first edition, which is a number the publishing trade had never seen before for a poem. His subsequent works have sold even faster. The Corsair sold 10,000 copies on the morning of its first day of publication, an event that the publisher John Murray himself described, in private letters, as the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened in his shop. His life is the life that the fashionable world watches. His marriage in January of this year to Miss Annabella Milbanke, the daughter of a country baronet from County Durham, was followed minutely in the newspapers and in private correspondence. His daily movements, his appearances in public, his rumoured relationships with various women, including a married half-sister whose name decent people will not say aloud, but which everyone knows. All of this is the daily intelligence of fashionable society. To see him, even for a moment, is to see the point where the life you read about in books and the actual physical life of the city converge. It is to understand that the famous people are not abstractions. They are people who walk the streets of London and box in Gentleman Jackson's and come out onto Bond Street where you might see them. You stand for some minutes in front of number 13 Bond Street. You look at the door. You watch the people coming and going in the street. A young man in a dark coat does come out of the building. He looks about 25, well dressed, with the heightened colour of a man who has been exerting himself in a room. But it is not Byron. He glances at the two of you with the polite, incurious glance that a stranger gives to a strange older woman and her young companion on a London street, and he walks off in the direction of Piccadilly. Your aunt waits a few minutes more, then suggests that you walk on. Byron may or may not come today. The point was not to see him. The point, in a quieter way, was to know where you would have seen him if you had seen him. The point was to walk past the door of his actual daily life. You have done that. You can move on. The two of you continue walking down Bond Street. Your aunt continues to point out the shops. Here is Berry Bros and Rudd, the wine merchant, in St. James's Street, just below Bond Street, established in 1698, with the great pair of coffee scales standing inside the door on which generations of fashionable men have weighed themselves at the start and end of every London season. The scales originally provided for the weighing of coffee beans, but now used for the private vanity of the gentleman who wishes to know whether he has gained a pound around the summer. Here is Weston's, the tailor, at 34 Old Bond Street, one of the most famous tailors in London, the establishment that cut Brummell's coats in the years when Brummell was at the height of his influence over male dress, and that still cuts the coats of the men who think of themselves as Brummell's heirs. Here is Schweitzer and Davidson, also a tailor, at 12 Cork Street, more elegant in its frontage than Weston, less established in its reputation, the second choice for the man who cannot get an appointment at Weston. Here is Hobie, the bootmaker, at 30 St. James's Street. If you want boots that will last, Hobie is where you come. He made the boots that Wellington wore in the Peninsular Campaign. He is famously rude. He is famously expensive. He turns away more business than he accepts. The mark of having one's boots made by Hobie is, in itself, a social distinction. By 11 o'clock, the street is getting busier. More fashionable women are arriving. You see ladies of all ages in morning dresses and bonnets, some shopping, some simply walking and being seen. You see a group of 3 young women, perhaps 19 or 20, walking arm in arm, talking with great animation. You see an elderly duchess in a black silk dress with a single string of pearls, walking slowly with a maid carrying her umbrella, a woman whose name your aunt whispers to you because she does not want it overheard. And who is? Your aunt says, one of the great political hostesses of the Whig party, and the woman through whose drawing-room the entire opposition to the present government conducts its delicate business. You see gentlemen too, though fewer. The men of the fashionable world tend to prefer the afternoon for their shopping, or they conduct their business through tailors and valets who come to them in their lodgings. Your aunt suggests that the 2 of you go into Hatchard's. She tells you that Hatchard's is one of the institutions of fashionable London. It is not merely a bookshop. It is a place where fashionable women come to see and be seen. It is a place where the latest books are discussed. It is a place where literary London conducts some of its business. She tells you that the proprietor, John Hatchard, is a man of pronounced evangelical opinions, a friend of William Wilberforce, of Hannah More, and of the powerful Clapham sect of Christian reformers who have been for the past 20 years the conscience of the better sort of fashionable London. He opened the shop in 1797 with a borrowed £5, and he has built it across 18 years into the most important bookshop in the country. The combination of evangelical seriousness and fashionable patronage is peculiar but real. The same shop that sells Lord Byron's deeply unrespectable poetry sells the religious tracts of the Religious Tract Society, of which Hatchard himself is a founding member. And the same fashionable women who have been talking at the assemblies the previous evening about the latest scandal involving Byron come into the shop the next morning to buy the new tract on the duties of the Christian woman. You enter Hatchard's. The shop is tall and narrow, rising perhaps 3 full stories inside the building, the upper levels reached by a wooden staircase at the back. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with books. The bindings are of every colour, the calf in browns and tans, the morocco in red and green and deep blue, the parchment in pale cream, the cloth bindings in the new stiff cloth that is just beginning to come into use, the cheaper paper covers of the unbound books that the buyer will take to his own bookbinder. There are tables in the centre of the shop on which the latest publications are displayed face up, with printed cards giving the titles. There are smaller tables along the walls on which special offerings are arranged, the new edition of Shakespeare, the complete Dr. Johnson, the standard works of the modern poets in the new uniform editions that the publishers have begun to produce. There is a counter at the back where the shop assistants stand, ready to help customers find what they are looking for, or to take orders for books that are not currently in stock, and that will be ordered up from the publishers and delivered within the day. The smell of the shop is the smell of new paper and leather bindings, and the accumulated smell of bookshops, a smell that has not changed, your aunt says, for the 200 years that bookshops in this form have existed. And that smells exactly the same in Hatchard's in 1815 as it did in the bookshop in Holborn that she used to visit in her youth in the 1770s. There is also, drifting from a back room, the smell of strong coffee that the shop assistants drink along the morning, and faintly through the open window at the back, the smell of horses from the mews behind the building. There are perhaps a dozen people in the shop at this moment. Some are browsing the shelves. Some are standing in conversation with the shop assistants. Some are simply looking, as you are looking, at the new books that have arrived from the printers in the past week. There is a clergyman in a dark coat looking through a folio of sermons. There is a fashionable young woman in a cream pelisse, leafing through a volume of poetry. There is an elderly gentleman in a wig of the older fashion that men of his generation have not given up. He was perhaps 50 when wigs went out, and he has continued to wear his because that is what he has worn for 40 years, and he will not change now, looking through the politics shelves with the attention of a man who has spent his life arguing about Charles James Fox and is not about to stop. There is a young couple, freshly married by the look of them, standing close together and reading something together, with their heads close, and the young husband is laughing at something on the page. Your aunt takes you to the counter. She asks the shop assistant about the latest novels. The assistant, a young man of perhaps 25, dressed in the formal clothes of a shop assistant in the better London bookshops, with an air of considerable knowledge about books, tells her that the latest sensations are the new Sir Walter Scott and the latest Lord Byron. The Scott, he tells her, is Guy Mannering, published in February by Constable in Edinburgh, the second of his anonymous novels following the success of Waverley last year. The authorship of these novels is not officially known. The title pages give them merely as, by the author of Waverley. But everyone in the trade knows perfectly well that they are by Walter Scott, and he is becoming, the assistant says, the most successful novelist in the country. The Byron, he tells her, is the new Hebrew Melodies, published in April, 24 poems set to traditional Hebrew tunes by Isaac Nathan, a young Jewish composer who has done well out of the connection. The volume is selling faster than they can restock. People are fascinated by the man as much as by the poetry. Every scrap of news about him sells books. He indicates, with a gesture, the copy of the latest Byron volume on the counter, bound in a red morocco with gilt lettering. Your aunt looks at it with interest. She does not buy it. She tells you that you can borrow it through Hookham's circulating library as a member, and there is no point owning a book that one only intends to read once. But she examines it with the care of someone who is interested in knowing what the fashionable world is reading. She turns to one of the poems and reads the famous opening lines aloud, very quietly, almost to herself, the lines about a woman walking in beauty like the night. Then she stops. She tells you that those two lines were apparently written about Mrs. Wilmot, a cousin of Byron's, after he had seen her at a ball wearing a black morning dress with spangles on it. Those two lines, your aunt says, are now perhaps the most quoted lines of any living English poet. They will be quoted at every assembly and every drawing room throughout the rest of this season, and women who have never read a line of poetry in their lives will use them as ornaments to their conversation, much as women in her own youth used to quote Pope. She sets the book down. She picks up another The New Walter Scott and turns its pages briefly. She comments to the shop assistant on the way the publisher has bound it. The assistant agrees. There is a professional discussion of bindings, of which she says no more than a sentence, but it is enough to establish between herself and the assistant that they are both serious customers of the book trade and that they understand each other. You spend perhaps 50 minutes in Hatchard's. Your aunt introduces you to the shop assistant by name. His name is Mr. Whitfield. She seems to know him, or at least to be known by him. She inquires about the health of his mother, who apparently is the sister of a woman who used to be your aunt's housekeeper many years ago. There is a conversation about Mrs. Whitfield's rheumatism. The assistant accepts the inquiry with the warmth of a young man who has been brought up to understand that the great ladies of his customers' rank can be expected to remember, with reasonable accuracy, the names and circumstances of their domestics' families, and that the inquiry is not idle. He thanks your aunt. She moves on. This, you are beginning to understand, is the way of fashionable London. Everyone knows everyone, at least indirectly. The connections are everywhere. To be fashionable is to understand and navigate these connections, and to maintain them requires a kind of social labour, the remembered name, the remembered circumstance, the inquiry that costs nothing and that costs everything if it is forgotten. Your aunt walks slowly through the shop. She stops at the table of new poetry. She looks at the histories. She looks at the religion shelves, where she finds and approves of a new tract by Hannah More. She looks at the geography shelves and approves of a new book on the Lake District by Thomas Wilkinson. She does not buy any of these. She is, you realize, performing an audit of the current contents of the shop, an audit that she conducts about once a week, in the same way that the housekeeper at her house conducts an audit of the linen press once a quarter. She wants to know what is in the shop. She does not need to own it. She picks up, finally, a volume, a new edition of the Sermons of Sidney Smith, the witty clergyman who is one of the principal writers for the Edinburgh Review and one of the great social ornaments of the Whig party. She buys it. The shop assistant wraps it in brown paper and ties it with string and writes her name in the ledger and bows. He tells her that the parcel will be delivered to Brook Street that afternoon. Since she does not wish to carry it, she thanks him. She and you leave the shop. When you leave Hatchard's, it is past 11:30. The street is now quite busy. There are perhaps 100 people visible on Bond Street at this moment. You see a carriage drawn up at the curb opposite, an open landau with the family crest of an earl on the side, in which a young woman of perhaps 25 is sitting alone, reading a book, while her footman is in the street in another shop. You see a group of officers in the dark green of the Rifle Brigade, just back from the Continent, walking in a loose group with the air of men who have not yet remembered how to walk on a London pavement. You see a very fat gentleman, perhaps 60, who is being helped into his carriage by 2 footmen with the obvious distress of a man whose body has become, in the past year, a serious daily burden to him. You see a very thin gentleman in a green coat walking quickly in the opposite direction, who your aunt identifies, in a low voice, as a moneylender who has been doing very well out of the gambling losses of certain young men of the highest fashion through the past 2 seasons, including, it is said, Mr. Brummell himself. Your aunt suggests that you have been walking long enough on Bond Street. It is time for the next phase of the day. It is time to go to Gunter's. You are confused. Gunter's is in Berkeley Square, she explains. Berkeley Square is not far from here? Perhaps 5 minutes' walk if you take the direct route through Burlington Gardens and across Old Burlington Street and through the connecting streets that lead into the back of Berkeley Square from the Bond Street side. You will walk. The distance is only a few blocks, and the walking will do you good. You have been carried in sedan chairs all morning. A walk will help you understand the geography. Geography, your aunt says, is something you must understand by foot if you are to understand it at all. Carriages and chairs give you the social sense of distance, but they do not give you the spatial sense of distance. You must know how Berkeley Square stands in relation to Bond Street, and you cannot know that without walking it. The two of you step out of Hatchard's and turn back down Bond Street, retracing your steps. Your aunt walks slowly, and she continues to point things out as you go. Here is the spot where, she has heard, Byron was seen coming out of Gentleman Jackson's last week, looking, the witnesses said, somewhat the worse for the morning's exertion. Here is the shop where the late Duchess of Devonshire used to come to buy her bonnets in the 1790s. The shop has changed hands twice since then, but the building is the same. Here is the turning toward Grosvenor Square, where some of the greatest houses in London are located, and where you will be going in an hour for lunch. You walk on. You turn into a connecting street, and find yourselves in Burlington Gardens behind the great Burlington House. You cross Cork Street with its less fashionable shops. You cross Old Burlington Street. You enter at last the back access to Berkeley Square through a narrow passage between two houses. The square itself is quite beautiful. It is lined with great houses, built in the previous century, with a park in the centre. Berkeley Square was laid out in the 1730s by William Berkeley, 3rd Lord Berkeley of Stratton, on the gardens that had belonged to the old Berkeley House before it was demolished, and the houses that line the square date variously from the 1740s through to the 1780s. The houses on the east side of the square are the grandest. Number 44 in particular, designed by William Kent in 1742, is widely held to be the finest terrace house in London, with an interior of marble and gilded plasterwork, and a great staircase of palatial dimensions that the late Lady Isabella Finch caused to be built in a house that is, on the outside, a perfectly ordinary 5-bay London townhouse. The houses on the other sides are less grand, more various, but all of them are houses of substance, and the whole square has the proportion that is the hallmark of the better London squares of the early Georgian period. In the centre of the square is the park, surrounded by iron railings, with great plane trees that were planted in 1789 by a Mr. Edward Bouverie at his own expense, and that are now mature trees of considerable size, and casting heavy summer shade over the gravel walks within the railings. The park is open only to the residents of the square, who hold keys to the gates set in the railings, but the trees overhang the railings and produce a wide ring of shade around the pavement on every side, and it is in that ring of shade beneath the trees on the east side of the square just opposite number 7 that the carriages of the customers of Gunter's draw up on summer mornings. The square is quiet at this hour. There are a few servants about, a few people walking. In the centre of the square, beneath the great trees, there are perhaps 6 carriages drawn up. Some are private carriages with footmen in livery standing at the horses' heads. Others are hired carriages of various kinds. In each carriage you can see the white figures of Gunter's assistants in their white aprons, leaning at the carriage windows or standing on the gravel beside the carriages, taking orders or delivering glasses, your aunt leads you to numbers 7 and 8 Berkeley Square on the east side, or rather, to the building that occupies both numbers, because the establishment has expanded around the wall between the two and now uses the ground floors of both buildings as one continuous shop. This is Gunter's. The shop itself is quite plain, no great fanfare, no large windows, no painted signboard, only a discreet board beside the door in gilded letters, Gunter, confectioner. But she explains that Gunter's is one of the most famous establishments in London, and certainly the most famous confectioner. The business was founded in 1757 by an Italian named Domenico Negri, who came to London with the wave of Italian confectioners, who arrived after the great Italian craze of the mid-century. Negri made his name with ices, and with the elaborate sugar sculptures that the great families ordered for their dessert tables, and he made enough money in 20 years to take a partner. The partner was a young man named Robert Gunter, who joined the firm in 1777 and bought out Negri entirely in 1799, 22 years later, and who is still alive in 1815 and still actively running the business at the age of about 65. The business has, under his management, become more famous than it ever was under Negri, because Robert Gunter has understood something that Negri did not, which is that the social arrangements of fashionable London require not just excellent ices, but a theatre of consumption around them. He has invented, or at least brought to perfection, the Berkeley Square carriage tradition that you are about to participate in. You enter the shop. The interior is small, quite elegant, with a counter at the far end, and a series of glass cases along the walls in which the various confections are displayed. Behind the counter are the assistants, perhaps 8 of them at this hour, all dressed in white linen aprons over their dark coats and trousers, all moving with the efficiency of people who have done this work for a long time. The cases display the various confections that Gunter's is famous for, the marzipan figures of fruit and flowers, the almond cakes, the candied violets, the crystallized orange peel, the great pyramids of biscuits, the sugared almonds in their pastel colours, the boxes of chocolates that have only been a Gunter's specialty for the past 5 years, since the price of cocoa has come down enough to make them available to a wider clientele. There are also the ices on display, kept cold in great pewter buckets packed with crushed ice and rock salt, the various flavours marked with ivory labels in the buckets: pineapple, bergamot, parmesan, brown bread, jasmine, white coffee, pistachio, strawberry, lemon, orange flower, elderflower. The smell of the shop is the smell of sugar and vanilla, and the smell of ice houses, the mineral smell of crushed ice in salt that has, for the people of 1815, the smell of expensive luxury. Ice is not a thing that any ordinary person eats casually. The ice that Gunter's uses comes from the great ice house in the basement of the building itself, kept stocked through the year by ice that is cut from the ponds on the great estates outside London during the winter, and stored, packed in straw, in stone-lined cellars. The cellar of Gunter's holds, in midsummer, perhaps 15 tons of ice, a quantity that the firm replenishes carefully along the season as it is consumed. The total cost of the ice that the firm uses across a single summer comes to several £100s, but the customers are willing to pay handsomely for the glass of ice they receive at the end of the chain, and the business is comfortably profitable. Your aunt speaks to one of the assistants, a thin elderly man with grey hair tied back in the old fashion, who has been with Gunter's for 30 years, and who knows your aunt, as he knows perhaps 2,000 other women of London by face and family, if not always by name. She tells him that she and her niece would like to take the ices in the square, under the trees, if a carriage can be arranged. The assistant nods. He tells her that it will be a few minutes. There are 2 parties ahead of you who have ordered the same arrangement, but that one of the smaller carriages will be brought round shortly. Would they like to wait inside or in the square? Your aunt chooses the square. She thanks the assistant. She tells him to send the ices in the usual flavours. A pineapple ice for the young lady, a bergamot ice for herself. The assistant writes a note on a slip of paper. The 2 of you go back outside and walk slowly throughout the width of the square to the line of plane trees on the east side. You stand for a few minutes in the shade. The square is quiet. The morning is becoming hot. Above you, in the great branches of the planes, sparrows are arguing over a piece of food that one of them has found. A maidservant from one of the houses on the south side comes out into the square with a white dog on a leash, and the dog squats in the gutter with the obvious relief of an animal that has been waiting for some time, and the maid waits patiently and then leads the dog back into the house. After perhaps 8 minutes, you see one of the Gunter's carriages being led out from the mews behind the building. It is an open carriage, painted in dark green with the firm's name in gilt letters on the side, drawn by a single bay pony. It is driven by a boy of about 16 in a brown coat. He brings the carriage round and draws it up beneath one of the great planes, and he sits patiently on the box, holding the reins lightly, while you and your aunt are helped in by another of the Gunter's assistants. You climb into the carriage and settle onto the cushioned seats. The carriage seats only 2 on its cushioned bench, with a folding seat that can be drawn out from beneath the bench if a 3rd passenger is needed, but for the 2 of you the bench alone is adequate. You sit side by side. Your aunt arranges her skirt. You look in the square at the houses on the west side, and you wait. The wait is perhaps 10 minutes. Then you see the Gunter's assistants coming through the square, one of them carrying a silver tray on which 2 glasses of ice are set, the other carrying a folding table. They approach the carriage. The boy with the table sets it up, very neatly, on the gravel beside the carriage. The boy with the tray sets the tray on the table. He arranges the 2 glasses. One is your pineapple ice, golden and smooth and translucent in the glass, faintly steaming as the cold meets the air. One is your aunt's bergamot ice, pale and delicate, the colour of pale lemon. There is a silver spoon with each glass, with the Gunter's mark engraved on the handle. There is a silver dish of crisp almond biscuits to be eaten with the ices. There is a linen napkin folded beside each glass. The assistant bows slightly. He tells your aunt that the bill will be sent to her house. He withdraws. The boy with the table withdraws. The 2 of you are left alone in the carriage in the shade of the plane tree, with the ices on the folding table beside you, and the morning gathering its warmth around you. Your aunt takes her spoon and tastes the bergamot. She closes her eyes briefly. She tells you that this, exactly this, is one of the reasons she remains in London. Not the balls or the opera or the theatre. Those are pleasant, but they are available anywhere that fashionable society gathers. One can find an opera in Naples or Vienna or Paris. And indeed she has heard better operas in all 3 places than she has ever heard at the King's Theatre. This, a pineapple ice under the plane trees of Berkeley Square on a June morning, this is London, this is Gunter's. This is what you cannot get anywhere else. You taste your pineapple ice. The flavour is intense, sweet, cold, utterly unlike anything you have eaten in Hampshire. The pineapple itself is a fruit that you have eaten perhaps 3 times in your life, on great occasions when your father's bishop has dined with the family, because a pineapple in 1815 in England costs perhaps 5 guineas, and is the most expensive single fruit that is grown in the country. They are raised in the great hothouses of the country estates. Your aunt's friend Mrs. Harrington has a famous pineapple house in Hampshire that produces some 30 pineapples a year, each one carefully tended for 2.5 years from planting to ripeness, and they are not casually eaten. To be eating an ice of pineapple, frozen and sweetened and made into something that floats on the spoon, is a marvel. The sensation of the ice on your tongue is almost shocking, the cold and the sweetness together producing a kind of joy. You have never eaten anything like it. You take a second spoonful, slowly. You take a third. You realize that you are afraid of finishing the glass too quickly, because once it is gone, and you are not sure when you will eat another. You sit in the carriage under the tree and you eat your ice. Your aunt talks in her way about the square. She has known this square for 4 decades. She has sat in this spot perhaps 100 times. She has watched fashions change. She has watched young women become old women. She has sat here with her husband, and at 15 years he liked the Parmesan ice, an extraordinary ice that Gunter's was famous for, made of cream flavoured with Parmesan cheese and sugar, which sounds peculiar but which was, your aunt insists, an excellent thing on a hot day after a heavy lunch. She has sat here with friends, some of whom are now also dead. The square itself changes slowly. The houses are repainted occasionally. New families move in, and old families move away. The iron railings round the central garden have been replaced once. The gas lamps have been added at the corners in the past 3 years, where there used to be only oil lamps. But the essential character remains. It is one of the constants of her life. Around the square, you can see the windows of the great houses. Inside those houses live the great families of London earls and their countesses, wealthy merchants who have bought their way up, retired admirals whose prize money from the long French wars has been invested in property, the widowed mothers of dukes, the unmarried daughters of impecunious younger sons. The visible world of the square is quiet, restrained, elegant, but she makes clear that inside those houses a great deal is happening. Behind the curtains of those windows, dinners are being planned, marriages are being arranged, letters are being written, debts are being owed and paid and refused, illegitimate children are being acknowledged or denied, political conspiracies are being conducted by the women whose names will not appear in any history of its time, but who are running half the political life of the country from their drawing rooms. The square is the surface of fashionable London. The reality is something deeper and more complex. She points out with a gesture the windows of number 11, directly opposite where you are sitting, on the west side of the square, and tells you that this is the house in which Lord Clive, the great conqueror of India, killed himself in 1774 by cutting his own throat with a penknife in his bedroom on the 2nd floor. She tells you the story very quietly, without emphasis. He had returned from India with a fortune of perhaps £250,000. He had bought this house, and the house in Shropshire, where he had also lived. He had been investigated by Parliament for his conduct in India, defended himself with savage success, and been declared blameless. And then, in his 54th year, with no one knowing exactly why, he had cut his own throat in the upper room of his London house and bled to death on the carpet before the servants could get to him. The carpet, your aunt thinks, has long since been replaced. The room is now occupied by a banker called Drummond and his family, who do not, perhaps, know exactly what happened in the room they sleep in, or who, if they do know, have made the private peace with the knowledge that anyone who lives in an old London house must eventually make. You eat your pineapple ice slowly. You try to remember the taste. You try to fix the moment in your memory, because you understand, even at this age, that this is a moment that will remain with you for the rest of your life. The carriage, the shade, your aunt at your side, the square around you, the dissolving of the cold sweetness on your tongue. You understand that you are being given something, and that the thing you are being given is not merely the ice, but the whole apparatus of the giving, the carriage, the assistants, the silver tray, the long history that has produced the moment. Your aunt has put you, very carefully, inside one of the perfect set pieces of fashionable London. She has done this on purpose. She wants you to remember. You finish your ice. The glass is empty. You set the spoon down on the silver tray. Your aunt finishes hers. She sets her spoon down beside yours. After a moment, one of the Gunter's assistants comes back over the square. He has been watching unobtrusively from the shop doorway and removes the tray and the table and the empty glasses. The boy on the box of the carriage clicks to the pony, and the carriage moves off slowly, away around the corner toward the mews, where it will be put up until the next customers require it. You sit for another few minutes in the shade. Your aunt has been sitting in Berkeley Square for perhaps 35 minutes. It is nearly 1 o'clock. Your aunt says it is time for luncheon. She has a friend, a woman of about her own age, who has invited the two of you to lunch at her house in Grosvenor Square. The square is not far from here. You will walk. You step out from beneath the plane trees and begin to walk. Grosvenor Square is just north of Berkeley Square, a few blocks away, the two squares connected by Davy Street and a lattice of side streets. The walk takes perhaps 8 minutes. As you walk, your aunt points out the various houses and the various people you pass. Here is a woman she knows being carried in a sedan chair, an old woman of about 70 with a face like a kindly mole, whom your aunt acknowledges with a bow of the head, and the woman in the chair acknowledges in return with a smaller bow. But the two of them do not stop, because the woman in the chair is on her way to an engagement, and your aunt is on her way to her engagement, and the rules of fashionable life do not permit two people to disrupt each other's arrangements without serious cause. Here is a young man on horseback, possibly a junior officer in the army based on his bearing and the cut of his coat, riding slowly with the held-back posture of a young officer riding through Mayfair, who is conscious that he must not gallop. Here is a carriage bearing the crest of a duke. Your aunt identifies the crest in passing as that of the Duke of Bedford, moving slowly down the centre of the street with two footmen in livery on the box behind the coachman. Grosvenor Square is larger than Berkeley Square and grander. The houses here are among the greatest in London. The square was laid out in the 1720s on what had been the Grosvenor estate, and its houses were taken from the start by some of the wealthiest families in the country. The American legation has its premises on the south side, in the great house at number 9 that was John Adams's residence when he was the first United States minister to the Court of St. James's in 1785. The Prince of Wales lived for a period at number 19, and the Duchess of Kendal, who was George I's mistress, had number 43 in the 1720s. Your aunt's friend lives in one of the largest houses on the north side, number 38, a great limestone facade of perfect proportions, 6 bays wide, 4 stories above the basement, with the classical portico over the door, and the family arms carved above it. A footman in dark blue livery opens the door. The two of you are shown into the entrance hall, which is paved in black and white marble in a pattern of large diamonds, and from there into the drawing room on the first floor at the front of the house. You climb the great staircase, which is of stone with a wrought iron balustrade, and which curves up around the open well of the stair hall to the principal floor above. The drawing room is beautiful. High ceilings, perhaps 15 feet, with a fine plaster cornice after Robert Adam, painted in white with a delicate gold detail along the principal lines. Tall windows looking out over the square, dressed in pale green silk curtains with white inner blinds. Walls painted in pale green to match, with a series of family portraits hung in symmetrical pairs along the long wall opposite the windows. Furniture arranged with attention to symmetry and elegance. 2 sofas facing each other around the centre of the room, a series of armchairs grouped around the fireplace, tables with silver candelabra ready to be lit when the afternoon sun sinks. There are flowers in vases, tall stems of white delphinium and yellow rose from the gardens of one of the family estates, brought up to London by a servant who came in by coach this morning. There is the smell of lavender and beeswax. The floors are waxed daily, the linen is laid in lavender, and the whole room has the distinctive smell of a great house that is kept by an establishment. The whole room speaks of money and taste and the arrangement of domestic life across many decades by women who have understood that a drawing room is not merely a room but a public statement of family standing. Your aunt's friend is waiting. Her name is Mrs. Harrington. She is perhaps the same age as your aunt, well into her 70s, but with the bearing of someone who has lived well and lost nothing of her dignity to age. She is wearing a morning dress of mauve silk with a white lace collar and a lace cap of the kind that married and widowed women of her generation wear in the morning when they are not expecting fashionable callers. She greets your aunt with genuine warmth. They have been friends for more than 50 years, since your aunt's first London season in the 1760s, and your aunt introduces you as her niece, visiting from the country. Mrs. Harrington looks at you with interest. She tells you that your aunt has told her about you in her letters, the daughter of a clergyman in Hampshire, visiting London for the first time. She tells you that you have chosen an excellent time to visit. The season is at its peak. The social calendar is full. The weather is reasonable. You will see London at its best. She inquires politely about your father. She met him once 30 years ago, when he came up to London on church business and stayed at your aunt's house, and she remembers him as an agreeable young man with a sermon style. She inquires politely about your mother. She has never met your mother, but she has heard good things, and she trusts that the family is well. She inquires about your brothers and sisters. These inquiries are the courtesies that an old lady of fashionable London extends to a young clergyman's daughter from the country, and they are conducted with an attentiveness that you have not experienced before. You answer as best you can, and Mrs. Harrington listens to each answer with the attention of a woman who is genuinely interested in what you say. The 3 of you move into the dining room, which is along the landing from the drawing room. A table has been laid for lunch. The great formal dining table is uncovered for the occasion, and a round mahogany table has been brought in and set in the bay window overlooking the square, dressed with a white cloth and a porcelain service of pale yellow and gold. The food is better than the food at your aunt's house, which is already better than the food at home. Cold chicken sliced thin and arranged on a Worcester platter, a salad of the new young lettuce from the kitchen garden of Mrs. Harrington's country place that came up by the night coach, fresh bread of a kind you have not eaten before, butter of an extraordinary sweetness, a wedge of Stilton cheese aged 12 months that smells extremely strong but tastes, when you cautiously try a piece, of an entirely new world of flavour, a dish of pickled walnuts, a glass each of a pale white wine that Mrs. Harrington identifies as hock from the Rheingau. The conversation flows easily between your aunt and Mrs. Harrington, with occasional questions directed at you. They talk about the people of London. They talk about the balls and the social events. They talk about the news. Wellington is in Paris, dealing with the aftermath of Waterloo, which was fought less than 3 weeks ago. The dispatches arrived in London on the 21st of June, not yet a fortnight ago, and the country is still absorbing the magnitude of what has happened. Mrs. Harrington's son-in-law, an officer in the 10th Hussars, was at Waterloo, was wounded in the leg by a piece of shell, was alive and well in Paris when the last letter came 2 days ago, but the family is still anxious because letters from Paris are delayed, and a wound in the leg in 1815 is not a trivial thing. The wound can become infected, can become gangrenous, and can carry off the patient before any further letter can reach London. Mrs. Harrington is, you can see, holding herself with the composure of a woman who has lived through many anxieties about sons and sons-in-law in uniform throughout the long French wars, and who has trained herself not to show worry. But she mentions the wound twice during the meal in different ways, and you understand that she is more anxious than she will admit. They talk about the latest books and the latest gossip. They talk with genuine warmth about people they have known for many years and who are now dead. A Mrs. Cavendish who died last winter, a Lord Carysfort who died in the spring, a great niece of Mrs. Harrington's who died in childbirth in February at the age of 22, and whose loss is, Mrs. Harrington says, the worst thing she has had to bear in 5 years. They talk about the present Princess of Wales, Caroline of Brunswick, who has separated from the Prince Regent and is living abroad in Italy, in circumstances that the polite London world hesitates to describe, but that everyone has heard rumours of. They talk about Lady Hester Stanhope, the niece of the late William Pitt, who has gone to live in the Lebanon and who corresponds occasionally with Mrs. Harrington, and whose latest letter came up by the diplomatic post a fortnight ago full of news about the Druze and the desert sheikhs and the expedition she has been planning to find buried treasure at Ascalon. They talk about Lord Byron, briefly, in tones that suggest that they do not approve of him, but that they cannot help being interested. They talk about the new King's Theatre season, which has just begun, and Mrs. Harrington tells your aunt that she heard the new soprano, Madame Fodor Manviel, the previous week, and was impressed. You listen. You are beginning to understand that fashionable London is, in many ways, a very small world. Everyone knows everyone. Every event connects to every other event. The people at the top of society know each other from childhood. The marriages and the friendships and the enmities of their youth determine the configurations of their old age. To be fashionable is to be part of this world. To understand fashionable London is to understand how all these people are connected to each other. You also understand, listening to your aunt and Mrs. Harrington in their easy old friendship, that this kind of friendship is itself one of the rewards of having been fashionable for 50 years. They have known each other since they were both young women. They have watched each other's children grow up and marry and have children of their own. They have nursed each other through illnesses and bereavements. They share by now a common reference of memory that no one outside the friendship can fully share. To watch them talking is to watch two old women who love each other in the undemonstrative way that old women of their generation express such things, and the love is itself one of the good things that you are being shown today. Lunch lasts for perhaps an hour and a quarter. By the time you leave Mrs. Harrington's house, it is nearly 2:30 in the afternoon. Mrs. Harrington walks down to the front door with the two of you to see you out. She kisses your aunt on the cheek. She tells you to come and visit her again before you leave London. She tells you that you have a face she likes. She closes the door behind you gently, and you are out on the steps in Grosvenor Square in the strong afternoon light, and the carriage is waiting at the curb because Wilson and his chairman have come up here at 1 as instructed and have been waiting for the past hour and a half on the wage of waiting men. She points out that you have been walking and talking for several hours now. You must be tired, but there is still more to see. The afternoon is the time for the park. The afternoon is when the fashionable drive and ride in Hyde Park. It is the most important social event of the day, in many ways. You will go home first, however, for an hour's rest and a change of dress. Hyde Park requires a fresh dress and the best hat. You will leave the house for the park at 4:30. You return to Brook Street by sedan chair. The journey takes perhaps 15 minutes. The chairmen carry you back through the streets of Mayfair, which are now in the full activity of a summer afternoon carriages everywhere, tradesmen's carts, riders going to and from the park, footmen running errands, ladies' maids with parcels, children with their nursemaids, the whole busy traffic of fashionable London at the height of the day. Your aunt takes you into her house and tells you that you have time for a brief rest before tea. You go upstairs to your room. You lie on the bed, not sleeping, but resting, thinking about everything you have seen. The bookshop, the confectioner, the great squares, the elegant houses, the people, the arrangement of everything. You think about Mrs. Harrington in particular. You think about her composed kindness. You think about the worry about her son-in-law in Paris that you saw twice break through the surface of the conversation. You think about the way she and your aunt looked at each other as you were leaving. A long look, the look of two old women who know that any meeting could be the last meeting and who therefore do not waste the meetings they have. You think about the food. You think about the wine. You think about the white delphinium in the vase by the window. You begin, slowly, to fall into a half-sleep that is not quite sleep, in which the morning's images move past you without any order. Brummell will not be seen for another 2 hours, but Brummell is somehow already in your mind. Although you have never seen him, Byron will not be seen at all, but Byron is in your mind too. The whole morning is settling, in some way, into the architecture of your memory. You let it settle. The room is quiet. The light is soft. You drift. At 4 o'clock, your aunt comes to your room and tells you that it is time to prepare for the afternoon in the park. She suggests that you change into a fresh dress. Your morning dress is dusty from walking. She suggests that you put on your best hat, the one you brought from Hampshire that is now looking rather provincial compared to the hats you have seen on the streets of London, but that is nevertheless the best hat you have. She tells you that you will see important people in the park, and you should be dressed accordingly, even if your dressing cannot quite achieve the standard that she would prefer for the occasion. You change with Mary's help. You put on your best dress, a pale blue silk, with white embroidery at the hem and the cuffs. The dress you bought last year in Winchester for the assembly there in November, when the militia officers were quartered nearby and there were balls every fortnight. The dress was, at the time, the height of Winchester fashion. But you can see now, having been on Bond Street this morning, that it is perhaps a year behind the London fashion in the cut of the bodice and the length of the sleeve. It will have to do. Your aunt has, when you went down to her room earlier, considered for a moment lending you one of her own dresses. She has several that have not been worn since her widowhood, and that might be made over for you in a day if a seamstress could be found. but she decided, in the end, that the appearance of a young woman in the slightly out-of-fashion dress of her own background was preferable to the appearance of a young woman in a borrowed older woman's dress badly altered. She has also, however, lent you a string of pearls, her own given her by her husband on the birth of their first child to wear at the throat, on the principle that a piece of obviously good jewellery does much to lift the appearance of a dress that is otherwise modest. You put on the pearls, you put on your gloves, you put on your best hat, which is a straw bonnet with a wide pale blue ribbon and a spray of artificial flowers at the side. You look at yourself in the mirror. You look, you think, as fashionable as you can manage. Given that you have only just arrived in London, and given that your best is the modest best of a clergyman's daughter in a country town. The pearls do help. The dress is still a year behind the London fashion, but you look respectable. You look like a young woman of family who is dressed to be seen in the park. That, in the end, is the requirement. At 4:30, the carriage is brought around. It is a private carriage belonging to your aunt, not a hired one like the sedan chairs or the carriages you hired for getting around the city. The carriage is painted in dark green with the family crest on the side, a heraldic arrangement, an ancient charge of 3 sheaves of wheat above a chevron that speaks of several generations of birth in the family of your aunt's late husband. The interior is lined with green velvet. The seats are deeply cushioned with green velvet bolsters at the corners for resting against. There is a lamp for evening travel mounted on the inside of the front panel, with a glass shade and a reservoir for oil that the coachman fills before any evening journey. There are pockets in the doors for handkerchiefs, smelling salts, books. The carriage is an excellent travelling carriage, made by Hatchett of Long Acre in 1796, at a cost of £240. It has been in your aunt's possession for 19 years. It has been reupholstered twice, once in 1804, once in 1812, and repainted 3 times, but the body itself is the original body, and the carriage will probably last another 20 years if it continues to be looked after as carefully as it has been so far. The carriage is, in ways, the true reflection of your aunt's status and her life. It is not the carriage of a great family. Those are larger, with 4 horses, with 2 footmen on the box behind, with elaborate liveries, and the ostentatious display that the great families consider obligatory. It is the carriage of a comfortable widow of independent means, who can afford a private carriage with 2 horses, but does not need to pretend to be grander than she is. It is the carriage of someone who knows exactly her place in the social order, and who has chosen the equipage that fits that place perfectly. The horses, a pair of bays of about 15 hands, are good but not extraordinary, kept at livery in a stables off Mount Street, where your aunt has been a customer for 30 years. The coachman, a man of about 50 named Bentley, has been with her for 22 years. The single footman who rides on the box behind, a younger man named Thomas, has been with the household for 8. Bentley helps you and your aunt into the carriage. He closes the door. There is the thud of the door, the click of the latch, the swaying as Bentley climbs back to his seat on the box. You hear the sound of the carriage moving forward, the creaking of the suspension as the wheels turn over the cobbles, the walking pace at which Bentley starts every journey before working up to the trot. Brook Street passes behind you. The carriage turns into Davy Street, then into the lattice of streets that lead toward Park Lane, then onto Park Lane itself, then south along Park Lane, toward the Grosvenor Gate of Hyde Park. The carriage travels at a pace, as all carriages in the fashionable hour must travel. There is no point in rushing. The pleasure of the park is not in getting there quickly. The pleasure is in the journey, in being seen, in passing other carriages, in taking note of who is in those other carriages and with whom. The whole point of going to the park at this hour is to be seen going to the park, and to see who is also going to the park, and to register all of the social information that the procession through the streets and the procession around the ring of the park together generate. Bentley understands this perfectly. He has been driving your aunt to the park at this hour for 22 years. He knows the right pace. You pass through the streets of Mayfair and toward the Grosvenor Gate of Hyde Park. As you approach the gate, you can see that the park is quite full. There is a stream of carriages waiting to enter, perhaps 15 or 20 of them in line, with the gatekeeper waving each through in turn. There are riders on horseback going in past the carriage line, using the wider verge that is reserved for them. There are pedestrians walking beside the carriage stream toward the smaller gates that admit those on foot. Your carriage moves slowly through the gate and into the park. Once inside, the road forks to the right toward the great drive that runs around the perimeter of the park. To the left, into the ring, the great oval drive that is the principal stage of the afternoon promenade. Bentley turns left. The carriage moves at a walk into the ring. You see at once what your aunt was telling you about. There are perhaps 120 carriages visible at this moment within the ring, drawn up in the procession that moves around the oval at a walking pace, with about 30 horses, with riders moving alongside them on the wider verge that is called Rotten Row, the broad sand-covered track that runs along the south side of the Serpentine, and that has been the principal riding track of fashionable London since the time of William III, when it was first laid out as the Route du Roi, the King's Road between Kensington Palace and St James's. The English ear corrupted the French name to Rotten Row in the 18th century. The track is still called by the corrupted name, but the function is unchanged. It is where the fashionable men of London come to ride between 4 and 6 in the afternoon during the season, to be seen on their horses and to see who else is there. There are people on foot too, perhaps 50 of them visible, walking among the carriages or standing in groups beside the rail that separates the ring from the surrounding park, chatting with the occupants of the slow-moving carriages or simply watching the procession. There are servants standing by the horses of the carriages that have stopped briefly. There is a general impression of leisured pleasure and observation, of a great open-air drawing room in which several thousand people are conducting, simultaneously, the constant theatre of fashionable display. The air carries the smell of horses, of leather, of dust kicked up by the carriage wheels, of the hot afternoon coming off the trees, of the cloud of perfume that the women in the open carriages release as they pass. Your carriage moves into the ring and joins the procession. Bentley keeps your aunt's bays at a walk, neither too slow nor too fast. Your aunt sits forward to look out over the front panel of the carriage. She begins to point things out, with the air of a guide who has been showing this spectacle to first-time visitors for several decades, and who has perfected the art of doing it well. Here, in the carriage just ahead of yours, is a duchess, the Duchess of Rutland, your aunt thinks on her second turn round the ring, already by the look of her, with her 2 daughters, Lady Anne and Lady Elizabeth, in a grand barouche with a splendid pair of greys, and a coachman in the family livery of dark blue with silver buttons. Here, on a horse trotting on the row, is a general, a man who fought in Spain alongside Wellington and who has just come back to London for the season. General Sir Charles Stuart, your aunt thinks the brother of Lord Castlereagh, who is now at the Congress of Vienna. Here is a young woman of about your age, in an open landau, being driven by a young man. A flirtation, your aunt suggests, looking carefully at the way they are sitting, or possibly an engagement not yet announced. Here is the Earl of Sefton in his curricle, driving himself with the famous reckless skill of one of the great whips of the age. Here is the Marquess of Hertford, the Prince Regent's friend, in a yellow phaeton with bright yellow wheels, looking at the world with the bored watchfulness of a man who has spent his entire life at this exact occupation. The carriage moves slowly around the ring. You see faces at the windows of other carriages. You see hats raised by gentlemen on horseback as they pass acquaintances. You hear voices calling greetings to your aunt, a Mrs. Forsyth, an elderly Mr. Cavendish, a young lady Asgill, whose mother was at school with your aunt 50 years ago. Your aunt responds with waves and nods, with the upward lift of the chin and the turning of the head that is the proper acknowledgement when one is in a moving carriage. She does not stop to talk. Stopping would be a breach of the carefully managed social choreography of the park, would hold up the carriages behind, would invite real reproach from those whose progress was being interrupted. The fashionable hour in the ring is conducted entirely on the move. The acknowledgements are brief, the greetings are brief. Anyone who needs to talk further does so by visiting the next morning, or by sending a card, or by arranging an encounter elsewhere. The ring is not for conversation. The ring is for the constant exchange of recognition. Midway around the first circuit, your aunt sits forward and points. On Rotten Row, on a horse, is a man of about 40, dressed in the riding clothes of a fashionable gentleman. He is riding slowly, his eyes surveying the crowd of carriages with the air of someone who is accustomed to being observed and who finds some amusement in the business of being observed. His horse is a tall bay, well-bred, well-groomed, walking with the pace of a horse that has been trained to move at exactly the speed its rider requires. The man's coat is dark blue, double-breasted, cut close to the body in the manner that has been associated with him for the past 15 years. His breeches are buff buckskin, his boots are highly polished, with the pinkish cream tops that have become his signature in the matter of boots. His cravat is white linen, tied in the simple knot that he himself made fashionable in 1798, and that has been worn by every gentleman of fashion in England since. His hat is a tall black silk top hat. His gloves are pale yellow. His face is ordinary, perhaps even plain, not the face of a great beauty with a long nose and a receding chin and bright observant eyes, but the face of a man who has organized every other aspect of his appearance with such meticulous care that the face becomes, in the context of the rest of him, the modest plinth on which the carefully constructed monument of the rest is erected. This, she explains, is George Brummell, the man known to all London as Beau Brummell, though he himself does not use the title, and considers it vulgar when others use it, or rather, this was Beau Brummell. He is no longer quite as fashionable as he was 5 years ago, when he was at the absolute peak of his influence over fashionable dress and manner, when his rooms in Chesterfield Street were the levee of the morning fashion of London, and the Prince Regent himself attended his dressing for an hour at a stretch to watch the great process by which Brummell put himself together. Things have changed. 2 years. There was a famous incident at a ball at Watier's. The Prince Regent, who had quarrelled with Brummell over some matter, possibly Brummell's increasing rudeness to the Prince's friend Lady Hertford, had cut Brummell publicly, refusing to acknowledge him in the receiving line. Brummell, standing with Lord Alvanley, had turned and asked, audibly enough for the whole receiving line to understand, who Alvanley's fat friend was. The remark, she explains, was not the disaster that some have made it out to be. Brummell had said worse things about the Prince before, and the Prince had heard worse things about himself. but it was in retrospect the moment after which Brummell's social standing began to erode rather than to rise. The prince has not received him at Carlton House since. Brummell is also, she adds, in the most serious financial trouble. He has been gambling steadily at Watier's for 10 years, and he has been losing at least as often as he has been winning, and the cumulative effect of 10 years of high play at the green table is that he is now in debt to several £1,000s, perhaps to as much as 10,000, the rumour goes, though no one quite knows. He has been borrowing from money-lenders to cover his losses. He has been borrowing from friends. He has been, in the private failures of a fashionable life, slowly destroying himself. Within a year, though no one in this ring this afternoon yet knows it, including Brummell himself, though he must in some part of his mind suspect, within a year he will flee to Calais on the night packet from Dover with the bailiffs at his heels, and he will spend the rest of his life on the continent in increasingly straitened circumstances, dying at last in a charitable asylum in Caen in 1840, of what was probably syphilis. But this afternoon, in June of 1815, he is still on his bay horse on Rotten Row, still the man whose dress sets the standard, still the figure whom every other gentleman in the park is in some subconscious way comparing himself to. You watch him as the carriage moves slowly around the ring. He is not a handsome man, exactly. His face is ordinary. His build is unremarkable. But there is something in the way he sits on the horse straight, balanced, with the reins held lightly in one hand, and the other hand resting on his thigh. That is itself an art. The care with which his coat is fitted, the exact knot of his neckerchief, the shine of his boots, the precise angle at which his hat sits on his head, everything about him has been arranged with the most meticulous attention to detail. Your aunt explains that Brummell is famous for spending 4 or 5 hours every morning on his toilet. He does not dress quickly. He does not dress without thought. He dresses with the precision of an artist creating a work of art. His linen is changed 3 times a day. His boots are polished with a special preparation that includes, by his own famous boast, a quantity of champagne. His coats are made for him by Weston of Old Bond Street, and by Schweitzer and Davidson of Cork Street, and each new coat goes through a series of fittings before it is allowed to leave the tailor's premises. The result is a man who, without being handsome or impressive in any obvious way, is somehow more fashionable than anyone else in the park. Your aunt explains that the importance of Brummell, beyond the matter of his clothes, is what he represents. He is the first man in English history to have made a successful career out of being famous for nothing in particular. He has no great fortune of his own. He inherited only a modest sum from his father, who was a private secretary to Lord North, and he has spent that sum and much more besides. He has no title. He has no political position. He has no scholarly attainments. He has no accomplishments in the ordinary sense. His entire significance in the world derives from his having become, by some mysterious process, the man whose taste in dress and behaviour the rest of fashionable society has chosen to follow. He is the inventor, your aunt suggests, of the modern phenomenon of celebrity. He has done what poets and politicians have done before him, but he has done it without writing or acting or governing or fighting or anything else that has ever been the basis of fame, and he has done it more completely than any of them. The Prince Regent himself has been, in some real sense, less famous than Brummell through the past 15 years. Brummell has invented something, and what he has invented is a strange and frightening thing which the future will see more of. The carriage moves on. You continue slowly around the ring. Your aunt continues to point out people and to tell you stories about them. Here is a woman who was once celebrated for her beauty, but who has aged badly and now stays mostly at home. Lady Caroline Stuart, 20 years ago perhaps the most beautiful woman in the country, now a thin, tired-looking woman of 50 in a dark dress, with a look of endurance about her. He is a man who made a fortune in India, and who is now trying to buy his way into fashionable society by giving the best dinners in London, a Mr. Atkinson, who has acquired a great house in Portman Square, and who entertains lavishly, but whom the older families have not yet quite accepted, though they go to his dinners because the food and the wine are extremely good. Here is a young woman who will marry an earl before the summer is out. The engagement is not yet announced, but everyone knows because the young woman's mother has been telling everyone in the strictest confidence for the past 3 weeks. Here is the wife of a famous admiral, whose husband is at sea but whom she rarely sees in any case, because she has lived for the past 4 years under the protection of a member of the royal family, whose name no one will say aloud but which everyone knows. You complete one circuit of the ring. Your aunt suggests that the two of you do another circuit before it gets too late in the afternoon. The carriage moves around again, slowly, observing and being observed. On the second circuit, you pass Brummell again, who is still on Rotten Row, still riding slowly along the same stretch of sand. He has paused this time to speak to a young woman in a carriage that has drawn up at the rail. The young woman is laughing. Brummell is leaning down from his saddle, smiling slightly. The whole scene is composed with a quality that you find difficult to describe. It has the quality of a painting, of a tableau that has been arranged for the inspection of an audience that is itself part of the composition. Brummell knows he is being watched. The young woman in the carriage knows she is being watched. The audience in the surrounding carriages knows it is the audience. Everyone is performing. Everyone is observing. It is during this second circuit, as you are moving along the path that runs near the Grosvenor Gate, that you see something that makes your heart stop slightly. A carriage of exceptional grandeur has just entered the park at the gate. It is painted in dark red and gold, pulled by 4 matched horses, black with silver-mounted harness, with white plumes set above their heads in the silver fittings. There are 2 coachmen on the box, both in liveries of dark red and gold with silver buttons. There are 2 footmen on the box behind in matching livery. There is, on the side of the carriage, a crest, not a simple heraldic arrangement like your aunt's, but a grand display of royal symbols, the lion and the unicorn, the 3 feathers of the Prince of Wales, the motto Ich Dien woven through the central scrollwork. The carriage is large, open to the air, an open landau in the new German style, and in it are sitting 3 people, a man of about 55 in the centre, with 2 ladies, one on either side. The man is heavily built, his face flushed with the heat, or perhaps with port wine. He is wearing a dark blue coat, heavily embroidered with gold thread, a white waistcoat, a cravat of great elaboration. His hat, a black silk top hat, is set on the seat beside him because the day is warm. His hair is thinning at the front and grey at the temples. He is talking to the lady on his right, a woman of about the same age as himself, who is laughing. Your aunt sees your reaction. She leans toward you and tells you in a low voice that you are looking at the Prince Regent. This is his carriage. This is his horses and his livery and his style. The man in the centre is the most powerful person in England, not technically the king, because George III is still alive in the darkness of his madness, shut away in the country at Windsor, but effectively the king. The lady on his right is the Marchioness of Hertford, his current friend, the woman whom he has been openly devoted to for the past 8 years, and whose son, the Earl of Yarmouth, he has placed in various positions of profit and ease as a standing thanks for his mother's continuing complacence. The lady on his left is a younger woman whom your aunt does not immediately recognise, possibly the Marchioness's daughter-in-law, possibly some other relation, possibly just a courtier of the prince's circle. Everything that happens in fashionable London happens because the Prince Regent makes it happen or allows it to happen. He chooses the architects whose buildings rise. He chooses the painters whose pictures are commissioned for the royal collection. He chooses the writers who receive royal patronage. He has built the pavilion at Brighton in its astonishing Oriental fantasy over the past 12 years, and he is continuing to extend and elaborate it. He has commissioned the rebuilding of Carlton House around the same period. He has been the patron of John Nash, whose great schemes for Regent Street and the new park to the north of the West End are at this moment under construction. He has, in his way, more cultural influence than any English monarch since Charles I, and yet, she adds, he is also the most disliked monarch since the early Stuarts. He is openly mocked in the popular prince. The crowds in the streets boo when his carriage passes. He is in such constant fear of public hostility that he no longer attends any public function where he cannot be sure of being protected from the crowd. The contradiction is striking. Monarch who is both the great patron of his age and the most unpopular figure in his country, simultaneously the head of a brilliant cultural moment, and the object of more savage caricatures than any king in English history. He does not look, sitting in his open landau on a summer afternoon in his park, like a figure of either kind. He looks like a heavy middle-aged man who is enjoying a drive with 2 female friends and who has had, perhaps, too much wine at lunch. You watch the carriage as it moves around the ring. The Prince Regent does not look in your direction. He is talking to the Marchioness of Hertford, with the air of a man who is confident that everyone around him is looking at him, and who is accustomed to that attention. The carriage moves slowly, with the measured pace of someone who is in no hurry, and who understands that the slower you move, the longer you are observed. It passes within 10 yards of your aunt's carriage. You see, very clearly, the way the prince's coat is cut, the way his cravat is tied, the movement of his hand as he gestures while speaking. You see, on the finger of his left hand, a heavy gold ring with a stone in it that catches the afternoon light. You see the flush in his cheeks, the bored watchfulness of his eyes, the smile that he gives to the Marchioness as she replies to whatever it was he was saying. The whole moment lasts perhaps 8 seconds. Then the carriage has moved past, and you are looking at the back of the heads of the 2 coachmen, and the prince has been seen. She tells you that you have now seen one of the great sights of the London season. To see the Prince Regent in Hyde Park is something that any visitor to London should see. You have seen him. You have been in the same park as the most powerful person in England, and you have been close enough to see the colour of his eyes if you had cared to look, which she suspects you did. It is not a moment of great conversation or connection, but it is a moment of historical presence, and you may find, in years to come, that the fact of having seen him on this day is something you draw out of memory and tell people about, because elderly people tell young people about the great figures they once briefly saw, and the young people listen with the polite attention that they give to such anecdotes. The carriage continues around the ring. By the time you complete the second circuit, the sun is beginning to get lower in the sky, The light is taking on that golden quality of late afternoon that you have noticed before in the country, but that has, in London, a different quality, because the dust of the streets and the faint coal smoke of the city give the light a thicker texture. The shadows of the great trees lengthen along the carriage drive. The fashionable hour is beginning to draw to a close. The first carriages are leaving the ring, peeling off from the procession to head back through the gates and home to the houses of Mayfair and Belgravia and St. James's, where their occupants will rest before dinner. Your aunt says it is time to go home. You have been in the park for almost 2 hours. You have seen enough for one day. The carriage turns out of the park at the Stanhope Gate, begins the journey back toward Mayfair. You settle into the cushioned seats and look out at the streets of London passing by. The streets are less crowded now. The fashionable have gone home to rest before dinner. There are servants going about their evening business, shopkeepers closing their shops, children playing in the squares. There is a man walking with a cello case in his hand, perhaps on his way to play for someone's dinner in one of the great houses. There is a woman selling lavender from a basket on her arm, calling out her wares in a sing-song voice. There is a fat old porter sitting on a doorstep with his hat off and his face turned up to the sun, eating a piece of bread and cheese with the absolute concentration of a man for whom this is the great meal of the day. You arrive back at Brook Street at a little past 6 o'clock. She tells you that you have a little more than an hour to rest and prepare for dinner. Dinner will be at 7:30. After dinner, the two of you will go to the Italian Opera at the King's Theatre in the Haymarket. You should dress as you would for a ball. Your best evening dress, your jewellery, your finest toilette. The opera in 1815, your aunt says, is the most important social event of any evening on which it is performed, and the boxes of the King's Theatre are inspected by the rest of the audience with the same attention that the ring is inspected in the afternoon. You must look your best. You go upstairs to your room. You lie on the bed again, not sleeping, but resting. You are tired from the day's walking and observing. You have seen so much. You have been to so many places. You have seen the Beau Brummell, the most fashionable man in England. You have seen the Prince Regent. You have sat under the trees of Berkeley Square eating ice. You have walked Bond Street. You have been inside Hatchard's. The whole of fashionable London, in its principal places and its principal figures, has been laid out before you throughout the past 9 hours, and you are, for the first time since you arrived in London 4 days ago, beginning to feel that the city is not unknowable. You are beginning to feel that you can, with patience and time, learn to move through it. You think about your aunt. You think about her 4 decades of patient acquisition of the knowledge she has shown you today. You think about how strange it must be to have lived so long in one place, to know it so well, to have watched so many people grow up and grow old and die in it. You think about what she has been giving you in the past 8 hours, not merely a tour, you understand, but a transmission, the passing on from one woman to another of the inherited knowledge that allows a woman to live a respectable life in fashionable London. Your mother could not have given you this. Your father certainly could not. Only your aunt could. And she is doing it with the unobtrusive seriousness of a woman who knows that this is, in a real sense, her last opportunity to give you anything. She is 65. The probability is high that she will not have many more summers in which to give you this knowledge. She is using this summer to give you what she has. You lie on the bed, and you breathe slowly, letting your back and your feet recover from the long afternoon. You think about the food you ate at Mrs. Harrington's. You think about the white delphinium in her drawing room. You think about Brummell on his bay horse, You think about the Prince Regent in his open landau, the flush of port wine on his cheek. You think about Gunther's, about the cold sweetness of the pineapple ice melting on your tongue. The day is composing itself in your memory into a set of bright images that you understand will stay with you. 6:45. Mary comes to your room and tells you that it is time to prepare for dinner. You rise and wash. You change into your evening dress, a white silk gown with silver embroidery at the neck and the hem and the cuffs, the dress you bought last year for the assemblies in Winchester, which now seems suddenly provincial, but which is all you have. The skirt is full and falls to the ankle. The waist is high, just under the breast, in the present fashion. The neck is cut low, perhaps lower than you would have liked, in a strange house, but the style of the year demands it, and you cannot alter it now. The sleeves are short, ending at the elbow, and you have over them a pair of long white kid gloves that go up above the elbow and are buttoned at the wrist with a mother-of-pearl button. You pin up your hair, with Mary's help, in the loose Grecian style that is the present mode, with tendrils falling at the temples and a single white silk ribbon worked through the back. You put on your jewellery, your aunt's pearls again, this time a different string of them that your aunt has lent you from her dressing table, a bracelet of seed pearls that was your grandmother's, a gold ring that was your father's confirmation gift to you on your 14th birthday. You put a touch of rosewater behind each ear and at the hollow at the base of your throat. You look at yourself in the mirror. You look, you think, as well as you can manage. The dress is a year out of date, but the simplicity of the line is itself somehow distinguished. And the white silk with the silver embroidery looks, in the light of the candles that Mary has now lit on the dressing table, more sumptuous than it did in the daytime light at Winchester last November. You look like a young woman of family who is dressed for the opera. That is enough. Dinner is taken at 7:30. It is a simple dinner, just your aunt and yourself, served by the servants in the dining room of the house at the round table that is brought in for the use of two when the great formal dining table is not required. The room is candle-lit. The great chandelier in the centre has not been lit for the use of two, but a pair of candelabra of 6 candles each have been placed on the table, and the yellow light moves through the white cloth and the silver and the porcelain in the flickering manner that gives a candle-lit dinner its character. The food is excellent. There is a clear soup of veal and herbs, served from a silver tureen by the senior footman, who ladles it into your plate with the perfect economy of a man who has done it 20,000 times. There is fish, soles brought up from Hastings that morning, lightly fried, served with a butter sauce. There is a roasted fowl, carved at the side table by the same footman, with a sauce of mushrooms. There are vegetables in 2 silver dishes, new potatoes from the kitchen garden of one of the country estates that supplies your aunt's house, and the first peas of the season, sweet and green. There is a dish of asparagus that came up from Kent that day. There is a dish of strawberries with cream, the strawberries from the same kitchen garden as the peas. There is a piece of cheese, a young cheddar, eaten with a single biscuit. There is wine, a glass of sherry with the soup, a glass of hock with the fish, a glass of claret with the fowl, a glass of Madeira at the end with the cheese. Your aunt tells you stories about her life, about her husband, who died 15 years ago, about the years she has spent in London, about the changes she has seen across 7 decades. She tells you, very quietly, that she met Dr. Johnson once at a dinner in 1782, 2 years before he died, and that he sat over the table from her, and was kind to her in a bullying way, and at one point asked her opinion on a matter of literary judgment, and listened with apparent attention to her answer. She tells you that she met Sir Joshua Reynolds twice, and that he painted a portrait of her husband in 1779, which now hangs in the drawing room. She tells you that her brother, your great-uncle, who died before you were born, was at school with Edmund Burke, and that Burke once stayed at the parsonage in Hampshire for 3 days in 1771. The names are names you know from books, names that belong to the great cultural history of the previous century, and to hear them dropped into the conversation as the ordinary furniture of an old woman's recollection is to feel for a moment the immense compression of historical time when it is held in the memory of a single long-lived person. Your aunt has been alive since George II sat on the throne. She has lived through the entire reign of George III. She has seen the loss of America, the French Revolution, the long war with France from 1793 to the present, 4 prime ministers including the elder Pitt and the younger, the trial of Warren Hastings, the abolition of the slave trade, the Act of Union with Ireland. She has, in the private way of an old woman of fashion, who has never written or said anything publicly memorable, carried in herself a substantial portion of the remembered experience of England around the past 3/4 of a century, and you, listening to her along the candle-lit table, are receiving pieces of that experience as she gives them to you. By 8:30, dinner is finished. Your aunt says the carriage will be waiting. The King's Theatre Haymarket is not far from here, perhaps a 10-minute journey by carriage. You will have a few moments to settle yourself before the opera begins. You get into the carriage. The carriage is the same one as in the afternoon, but the lamps have now been lit by the coachman before you came out, the oil lamps on the front of the carriage that throw a yellow light onto the road ahead, and the interior lamp that throws a glow onto the cushioned seats. The streets of London at night are different from the streets in the day. The gas lamps have been lit. The first generation of London street lamps installed on Pall Mall in 1807 by Frederick Albert Windsor, the German-born inventor and entrepreneur who persuaded the parish authorities to let him try the new technology in front of Carlton House on the King's birthday, and which have spread, in the 8 years since, throughout the whole of the West End. You are among the first generation of Londoners ever to see your city lit by gas. The light is not bright exactly, but it is sufficient to see by, and the character of it is different from the light of the older oil lamps. The oil lamps gave a yellower, more flickering, more uneven illumination. The gas lamps give a steadier, harder, bluish light, the light of a jet of coal gas burning at the top of a thin iron pillar. The gas is supplied to the lamps through pipes laid under the streets, brought from the gasworks at Westminster in the river. The lamps are turned on by lamplighters who go from post to post at dusk, with a long pole that has a flame at the end, lifting the flame to the gas tap, opening the tap, lighting the jet, and moving on. The whole character of the city is changed. The darkness is no longer absolute. The shadows are no longer the heavy shadows of the 18th century city, but the new lighter shadows of a city that has begun to be illuminated. The carriage moves through the lit streets. You pass the bottom of Brook Street and cross New Bond Street into Conduit Street. You pass into Hanover Square, with its great church on the south side. You turn into George Street. You pass the clubs of St. James's, now lit from inside, as men gather for the evening's business, the lights in the upper windows of White's, the lights of Brooks's, the lights of Boodle's all the way up the street, each clubhouse a pool of yellow light on the dark face of St. James's. You pass into Pall Mall, with its line of fashionable shops, now closed for the day, the shop windows still lit by the lamps that the better shops leave burning all night for the security of the displays. You pass the great frontage of Carlton House, the Prince Regent's London Palace at the bottom of Lower Regent Street, with its colonnade and its great front courtyard, and the line of footmen visible inside the gates. You pass Marlborough House, where the Princess Charlotte has her household. You pass the great entrance arch into the courtyard of St. James's Palace. The carriage turns down toward the Haymarket. You pass various streets and squares, all lit by the golden light of the gas lamps. You see, through the windows of the houses you pass, the interior glimpses of London at evening, a lamp lit in an upstairs room where a maid is laying out an evening gown, a candle on a window-sill where a child is being put to bed, a fire in a back parlour where an elderly couple are sitting reading, a kitchen in a basement area where a cook is finishing the cleaning after the dinner has been sent up. The carriage arrives at the King's Theatre, Haymarket, at a few minutes before 9. The theatre is ablaze with light. The great frontage on the Haymarket 5 bays wide, of yellow brick with stone dressings, with a tall central pediment and a row of plain sash windows above the central portico, is lit by a series of large oil lamps mounted on the wall above the entrances, and additional lamps held by linkmen who stand at the curb to assist arriving carriages. There are perhaps 40 carriages drawing up in a stream, each waiting its turn to set down passengers, and then move on so that the next carriage can take its place. There are footmen in livery from a dozen different households moving back and forth at the curb, opening doors, handing down ladies, escorting young women through the few feet of pavement to the entrance under the portico. There are link boys in coarse coats holding flaming torches to provide additional light at the moment of the descent. There are sedan chairs being set down for those who have come by chair. There are people on foot, the cheaper part of the audience, walking up to the side doors that lead to the gallery and the upper gallery. The whole forecourt of the theatre has the quality of a carefully orchestrated chaos. Bentley draws your aunt's carriage up at the curb in its turn. Thomas, the footman, jumps down from the box and opens the door and hands first your aunt and then yourself down onto the pavement. You step over the pavement and into the entrance hall under the portico. Inside the entrance, your aunt's name is taken by an elderly attendant in a black coat who knows her, who bows and who informs her that her box is ready and that her servants have been sent to wait upstairs. You climb a long stone staircase with a wrought iron balustrade. At the top, you turn into a long curving corridor lit by a series of oil lamps. Doors open off the corridor on the right-hand side, each door bearing a brass number, each door leading to one of the boxes that ring the great horseshoe of the auditorium. Your aunt's box is in the second tier, with a good view of the stage and an excellent view of the other boxes, which is perhaps the more important consideration in a theatre of this kind. The box is perhaps 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, with 3 chairs at the front and a bench at the back for an additional pair of occupants if needed. The chairs are upholstered in red velvet. The walls of the box are lined with red flock paper. There is a mirror on the back wall, in which a lady can quickly check her appearance before stepping forward to the front rail. There is a ledge beneath the front rail, where a programme can be set down. There is a handle by which the front of the box can be partly closed off with a curtain if its occupants wish to be less visible, a feature that some of the great families use during the more shocking parts of the more shocking operas, but that your aunt has never, she tells you, found necessary. The pleasure of the opera, your aunt explains as you settle into the front row of the box, is not entirely about the opera. The pleasure is also about seeing and being seen by the fashionable world. The arrangement of the King's Theatre, with its 6 tiers of boxes rising up around the great horseshoe of the auditorium, each box private but still open to the view of every other box, is in some ways a more efficient arrangement for fashionable observation than the Ring of Hyde Park. In the Ring, the carriages move, and you must catch the moving glimpse. Here, everyone is held in place around the 4 hours of the performance, and you can take your time, and you can return to look again, and the theatre of who is in which box with whom is laid out for your inspection along the whole of an evening. You settle into your seat. You look around the theatre. It is built in a semicircle, with perhaps 6 tiers of boxes rising up above the pit where the common people stand. Each box is private, separated by walls, so that the occupants can be seen but cannot be overheard. The whole effect is of perhaps 2,000 people in the same space, but in separate worlds, each box its own private chamber, pierced by the open view of all the others. The auditorium is lit by candles, the great chandelier hanging from the centre of the dome, with perhaps 100 candles burning in it, and the smaller candle brackets fixed at intervals around the lower edge of the boxes. And the whole theatre has the yellow flickering light of a candle-lit room of unusual size, a light that catches and reflects in the gold paint of the box fronts and the mirrors set into the back walls and the jewels and silks of the audience. The seats fill slowly. The boxes fill with fashionable people in evening dress. You see jewels flashing in the light of the candles, diamonds, pearls, the new French paste that has come into fashion since the wars made the importing of the real stones difficult, and that has been so well made that it is, in candlelight at least, indistinguishable from the genuine. You hear voices, laughter, the sounds of fashionable conversation throughout the open spaces of the auditorium. The pit below fills with people standing, the working and middle classes who cannot afford box seats, clerks and apprentices and tradesmen and their wives, dressed in their best clothes, packed in close together on the standing floor below the level of the lowest box. Above the boxes, in the gallery, are the cheapest seats, where the shop girls and the soldiers' wives and the servants on their evening off are crammed onto wooden benches. Your aunt points out, with discreet gestures, some of the famous people in the boxes. Here in the box directly opposite yours on the other side of the horseshoe is the Duchess of Devonshire, not the great Duchess Georgiana, who died 9 years ago, but her successor, Elizabeth, the late Duke's second wife, who was Georgiana's lifelong friend and her husband's lifelong mistress, and who has now, in widowhood, retained the title and most of the social standing she possessed before. Here, 3 boxes along from her, is Lady Holland, Elizabeth Vassall Fox, the wife of the 3rd Lord Holland, the great Whig hostess, whose drawing-room at Holland House is the centre of the Whig political world and the unofficial salon of literary London. Lady Holland was divorced from her first husband and remarried scandalously in 1797, and as a result of the divorce she is not received at court, but everyone else of importance comes to her dinners, and she has, in the past 18 years, held a position of social influence equal to anyone else's in London. Here, in the box next to Lady Holland, is a duchess your aunt does not at first recognise. The Duchess of Beaufort, she thinks, though she would have to look more carefully. Here is Lady Asgill again, whom you saw in the park. Here, in the next box up, is a young man who is rumoured to be about to propose to a countess. Here, in the box directly above your own, is an elderly man whom your aunt names as a Mr. Sharp, a banker who fought as a young volunteer with the British Army in Holland in 1794 and who was wounded at the Battle of Boxtel. Caroline Lamb your aunt thinks is somewhere in the house tonight, but she does not see her at first, and she does not look harder because the search would be conspicuous. Caroline Lamb in 1815 is a thin woman of 30 with pale curly hair who 3 years ago became famously infatuated with Byron in a way that destroyed her own reputation and contributed materially to Byron's. She is married to William Lamb, the future Prime Minister, who has been more patient with her than perhaps any husband in fashionable London has ever been with a wife. She is currently writing the novel Glenarvan, which she will publish next year, and which will further damage her standing, and she is herself the subject of constant fascinated discussion in the boxes around you, even when she is not present, and even when she is. Your aunt has met her several times through the years, and finds her, in the private words she uses to you, both pitiable and exhausting in equal measure. The orchestra begins to tune. The lights in the theatre are dimmed. The candle brackets along the box fronts are partly extinguished by the attendants moving along the edges of the tiers with snuffers on long poles, leaving only the great chandelier and the lights on the stage itself burning at full strength. The audience falls silent. The curtain rises. The opera tonight is Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito, with the famous Italian soprano Madame Fodor Manviel in the role of Vitellia and the English tenor John Braham in the role of Sextus. The conductor is the German-born Sir George Smart, who has been the principal conductor at the King's Theatre for several years. The opera was Mozart's last opera, written in the autumn of 1791, in the weeks just before his death, performed for the first time at Prague in September of that year for the coronation of the Emperor Leopold II as King of Bohemia. It is an opera seria in the old 18th century manner, with elaborate da capo arias and a stately classical structure set in ancient Rome in the reign of the Emperor Titus, dealing with conspiracy and forgiveness, and the noble character of the just monarch. You do not understand Italian, but your aunt has told you the story beforehand, briefly, while you were in the carriage on the way to the theatre, so you can follow the plot. The story is one of an attempted assassination of the Emperor Titus by his friend Sextus, who has been persuaded to the deed by the woman he loves, Vitellia, who hates Titus because Titus has not chosen her as his empress. The conspiracy is discovered. Sextus is arrested. Titus, learning of the conspiracy, is at first angry and then, after a long struggle with himself, decides on clemency. Vitellia confesses her own part in the conspiracy. Titus forgives them all, and the opera ends in the great chorus of praise to the merciful prince. The political message of the work, that a true monarch is one who governs by mercy rather than by punishment, is not perhaps lost on an audience that includes the Prince Regent's friends, who must wonder, listening to Titus's third act aria of self-examination, what their own prince might make of the same dilemma. The music is beautiful, the singers are skilled. Madame Fodor Manviel has a soprano voice of considerable range and beauty, and her Vitellia is sung with a passionate intensity that the role demands. Braham as Sextus is in excellent voice. Braham being one of the great English tenors of the age, a Jewish boy from the East End, who rose from singing in synagogues to become the leading male singer of the London stage. The orchestra plays the Mozart score with the elegance that the King's Theatre Orchestra at its best is capable of. The production is elaborate. There are scene changes, with whole flats of painted scenery being shifted on grooves cut into the stage. There are stage effects, including the famous third act conflagration of the Capitol, which is staged with painted flames and a great burst of red light from below the stage. The whole performance is one of the triumphs of the London opera season, but you find, as the evening progresses, that you are as interested in observing the audience as you are in observing the stage. You are fascinated by the behaviour of fashionable London. You watch the men and women in the boxes. You see couples who are clearly in love, leaning toward each other, hands touching over the space. You see couples who clearly do not like each other. The husband sitting with his arms folded, looking at the stage with the expressionless face of a man who is here because he has been required to be here. The wife looking at the stage with the same expressionless face for the same reason, neither speaking to the other, neither acknowledging the other, present in the same box only because the rules of fashionable life require that married couples appear together in public on certain occasions. You see people who are watching the opera intently, with the attention of the genuine music lover. You see people who are not watching the opera at all, but are instead watching the other boxes, with the sideways looks and the quick whisperings to their companions that are the language of social observation. You see, in one box, a young woman who is plainly bored, opening and closing her fan in a repeated gesture, and you wonder what her life is like, and whether she has come to the opera because she wanted to, or because someone older has insisted on it. You see, in another box, a young man who is staring across at a young woman in the box directly opposite him with the unconcealed concentration of someone who is in love and who is not bothering to hide it. You see, in the box just below the Duchess of Devonshire's, an elderly clergyman who appears to be following the libretto in a printed book by candlelight, his finger moving down the page as the singers sing. At the interval, there is a pause. The candle brackets are relit. The audience rises and stretches and begins to move. People leave their boxes to move about the theatre and visit other boxes. The great Regency social ritual of going out at the interval, in which the audience uses the half-hour break to circulate, to pay calls on friends in other parts of the theatre, to be seen in different boxes from the one they are nominally occupying. Your aunt receives visitors in your box, and Mrs. Forsyth, whom you saw earlier in the park, and Mrs. Forsyth's son, who is a young clergyman about to take up a parish in Sussex, a Lady Asgill, whose mother was at school with your aunt 50 years ago, and who comes in for 10 minutes to embrace your aunt and to be introduced to you and to ask, with the kindness of a fashionable older woman to a young country visitor, how you are finding London. There is conversation, catching up, the exchange of gossip and news. Lady Asgill has just come from another box, where she has been told that the Princess of Wales has written a letter from Italy denouncing her husband and threatening to return to England to claim her rights. The letter, Lady Asgill says, has been suppressed by the government, but the contents have leaked out, and the political world is in some turmoil about it. Mrs. Forsyth tells your aunt about an engagement that has just been announced between two families that you do not know, but that your aunt evidently does. The young clergyman tells you about his new parish and asks your father's name, and is delighted to discover that he and your father were at the same Cambridge college 12 years apart. The whole interval is, in its way, the social heart of the evening. The music has been the official occasion, but the visiting and the conversation are the substance. The bell rings to signal the resumption of the performance. Visitors withdraw to their own boxes. Your aunt settles back into her seat. The candle brackets are partly extinguished again. The orchestra resumes. The second half of the opera begins. The opera continues through the evening. It is nearly midnight when it ends. The final curtain falls on the great chorus of praise to the merciful Titus. The audience applauds, a long sustained applause that goes on for several minutes, with the principal singers coming out for individual curtain calls, with Madame Fodor Manviel receiving an extended ovation and a bouquet of flowers thrown from one of the upper boxes. The theatre empties slowly as fashionable people move back to their carriages. You wait in your box, as is the custom, for several minutes after the curtain has fallen, to allow the immediate crowd to begin to clear. Your aunt does not like to push through the crowds at the foot of the staircase. She prefers to wait until the worst of the press has gone. The two of you sit in the box, talking quietly, while around the theatre, the rustle and hum of an audience preparing to leave gradually subsides. After 10 minutes, your aunt rises. The two of you move out into the curving corridor and down the long stone staircase. The corridors are still busy fashionable people moving slowly, talking, calling for their carriages. But the worst of the crush has passed. You move out into the entrance hall, then out under the portico, then out into the Haymarket itself. The carriage is waiting. Bentley has brought it round and is holding the bays at the curb, and Thomas hands you up into the cushioned interior, and your aunt follows, and the door closes, and you settle back into the green velvet seats with the relief of a young woman who has been on her feet or in her seat for almost the whole of a long day, and who is now, finally, sitting in a private space with no one to observe her. The carriage moves off slowly through the stream of departing carriages. You pass under the portico of the theatre and out into the Haymarket. The gas lamps are still burning along the length of the street, throwing their light onto the pavement and the carriage wheels and the procession of fashionable London going home. You see, through the carriage window, the late-night life of the Haymarket, the linkmen extinguishing their torches at last, the porters of the theatre carrying out the great empty hampers of programmes and refreshments, a group of soldiers in the uniform of one of the Foot Guards regiments walking up toward Pall Mall, a woman selling oranges from a basket who has stayed late in the hope of catching the opera crowd, the life of the city at midnight that you would never see in Hampshire, because in Hampshire there is no midnight life of any kind. The carriage turns out of the Haymarket and into Pall Mall. The street is largely empty now. The clubs are still lit. Whites and Brookses and Boodles, the lights still burning in their upper windows where the gentlemen who never go home before 3 are still at their cards or their late suppers. But the shop fronts are dark and the offices are dark and the great houses are dark except for the lamp left burning in the front hall of each one for the family's return. The gas lamps along the length of Pall Mall throw their light onto the wide pavement. You see here and there a watchman walking with his lantern and his stick, calling out the hour in a sing-song voice, the old custom of the night watch, soon to be abolished when Sir Robert Peel's new police force is established in 1829, but still, in 1815, the principal arrangement for the keeping of the peace in the hours. You pass into Cockspur Street, and around the head of the Haymarket and up toward Lower Regent Street, which is at this moment still being built, the great new street that John Nash is driving north from Pall Mall through the old tangled lanes of the West End, sweeping away whole streets of houses to create the long ceremonial route from Carlton House to the new park that the Prince Regent has authorised and that will, in another decade, become Regent's Park. The construction is unfinished. There are scaffoldings on either side of the street, and piles of brick and stone, and the tar paper huts that the foreman of the works has put up for the storage of his tools, and the keeping of the night watch over the building site. The carriage moves past slowly, the wheels crunching on the rough surface of the unfinished road. You pass into the wider streets of St. James's. You pass the corner of St. James's Square. You pass the entrance to King Street where Almack's stands, the great assembly rooms, which on Wednesday nights in the season are the most exclusive ballroom in London. Almack's, where you cannot be admitted without a voucher from one of the patronesses, and where you have not yet been because no patroness has yet had occasion to see you, but where, if your aunt is sufficiently determined and the season has another month to run, she will perhaps contrive to have you admitted before you go back to Hampshire. The building is dark tonight. There is no ball at Almack's on Tuesday nights. The street outside it is empty. You look out at the city as you travel. London at night is beautiful in a way that London in the day is not. The gas lamps create a golden glow on the pavements and the buildings. The streets are quieter. The whole city has a more intimate scale when most of the people are gone and only the buildings remain. You can see, in the near-empty streets, the long lines of the Georgian terraces that you could not see in the daytime traffic, the unbroken brick fronts going on for hundreds of yards, the regular rhythm of the windows, the variation in the door cases that distinguishes one house from its neighbour. The city, freed of its daytime activity, shows you its bones. You see how it is built. You see what it is. The carriage turns up into Bond Street, retracing in the reverse direction the route you took this morning. The shops are closed and dark. The pavements are empty. You pass the door of Hatchard's. You pass the door of number 13 with its brass plates for Jackson and Angelo. You pass Weston the tailor and Hobie the bootmaker. The day's geography, that you walked this morning in the bright midday and the lazy crowd, is now a street at midnight, lit only by the gas lamps at the corners and by the lamps left burning in the upper windows of the houses where the families who live above their shops are perhaps still awake, perhaps still doing the accounts of the day. You turn into Brook Street. The carriage draws up at the door of your aunt's house. The hall lamp has been left burning by the housekeeper. The front door opens as the carriage stops. Mrs. Lambert, the housekeeper, has been listening for the carriage, as she always does, and has the door open by the time Thomas has the carriage door open. Bentley climbs down from the box. Thomas hands first your aunt, and then you down onto the pavement. You step along the few feet of pavement and up the 3 shallow steps and into the lit hall. The carriage moves off behind you, round the corner to the mews where Bentley and Thomas will see to the horses and put the carriage up for the night. It is very nearly 12:30. Your aunt thanks Mrs. Lambert and tells her that she may go to bed. The housekeeper has been waiting up, as is her duty, but your aunt does not see why she should be kept from her sleep any longer. Mrs. Lambert curtsies and goes through to the back stairs. Your aunt turns to you. She tells you that you must be exhausted. You should go to bed immediately. You will see her in the morning at breakfast. She kisses you on the forehead, very lightly, in the private way that she has not quite kissed you before throughout the 4 days of your visit. Then she turns and goes slowly up the staircase to her own room on the first floor, holding the banister carefully because the hour is late, and she is 65 years old, and the staircase has been climbed many times today. You climb the stairs after her, more slowly, your own legs heavy now with the accumulated weight of the day. You pass the door of her room already closed, and continue up to your own room on the 2nd floor. Mary is waiting for you. She has been listening for the carriage as well. She has the candles lit on the dressing table, and the bed turned down, and the night fire burning low in the grate, because the June nights in London are cool enough still to want a fire in a bedroom. You undress slowly, with Mary's help. She unpins your hair, untangling the Grecian arrangement that took her an hour to put up, brushing it out with the silver-backed brush, plaiting it into the loose night plait that you wear for sleeping. She unbuttons the long kid gloves at the wrist and draws them off your arms. She unfastens the mother-of-pearl studs at the back of the dress and helps you out of the white silk gown, hanging it over the back of the chair so that it can be properly put away in the morning when there is light to see by. She unfastens the silk stays underneath and helps you out of those, and out of the petticoat, and out of the silk stockings rolled at the knee. She brings you the long white linen nightgown, which she has warmed at the fire, and helps you into it. She takes the pearls from your throat and lays them carefully on the dressing table, on the tray that is kept there for that purpose. She takes the seed pearl bracelet and the gold ring and lays them beside the pearls. She brings you a basin of water and a towel, and you wash your face and hands. She brings you a glass of milk. Mrs. Lambert has left it on the night table in case you should want it, and you drink half of it. You feel the milk going down. You feel the softening of the day's weight that begins when a young woman is at last in a clean nightgown and has drunk something and is about to get into a bed she has been longing for. Mary helps you into the bed. The sheets are cool and fresh, Irish linen of the finest grade, washed in the household laundry and laid in lavender, stiff with the new starch but against the skin, once you have been between them for a moment. The pillows are soft, filled with the down that Mrs. Lambert keeps in stock against any pillow needing replenishment. The blanket is wool, with a damask coverlet over it. Mary tucks the bedclothes around you with the kindness of a young woman who has been doing this for the last 4 nights for a young guest who is herself almost as young as the maid is. She asks if there is anything else you need. You tell her there is not. She wishes you good night. She takes one of the candles, leaving the other burning on the night table for you to put out when you are ready, and she withdraws softly, closing the door behind her. The room is quiet. The fire makes sounds in the grate as the last of the coals settles. The single candle on the night table throws a yellow light onto the cream wall and the corner of the dressing table. From outside the window, very faintly, you can hear the tread of a watchman walking down Brook Street, calling out, in the sing-song that you can hardly make out at this distance, that it is 1:45 and that all is well. You hear, far off, the call of another watchman responding from another street. Then silence. You lie in the darkness of your room and think about the day. You have been to 20 different places. You have walked Bond Street. You have sat in Berkeley Square. You have eaten pineapple ice under the great plane trees. You have seen Beau Brummell on horseback. You have seen the Prince Regent in his carriage. You have watched Mozart's last opera at the King's Theatre. You have been carried through the gaslit streets of London at midnight. The day's images come up one after another, slowly, in no order, in the way the images of a long day come up in the mind of a tired person who is not yet quite asleep. The green velvet of the sedan chair, the morning light on the dew of Green Park, the smell of Hatchard's with its new paper and its leather bindings, the brass plates beside the door of number 13 Bond Street, the cold sweetness of the pineapple ice on your tongue, the white delphinium in the vase in Mrs. Harrington's drawing room, the look that passed between your aunt and Mrs. Harrington as you were leaving, the walking pace of the bays in the ring of Hyde Park, Brummell's unhandsome face on the bay horse with the perfect cravat at his throat, the Marchioness of Hertford's laughter as the Prince Regent leaned toward her in the open landau, the candles of the great chandelier at the King's Theatre, catching the diamonds and the pearls and the mirrors, the high sweet voice of Madame Fodor Manviel in the 3rd act, the light of the gas lamps on Pall Mall as the carriage carried you home. The images come and go. You do not try to hold any of them in particular. You let them pass. You think, in the drowsy way of a young woman about to fall asleep, about your aunt. You think about the kiss on the forehead at the bottom of the stairs. You think about the fact that she has done all of this today for you, has walked further than she usually walks, has sat in the park longer than she usually sits, has stayed up later than she usually stays up, has used the reserve of energy that an older woman husbands carefully across a long day, and has spent that reserve on a single day for a niece she has not seen since you were a child. You understand, in a way that you would not have been able to put into words even a week ago, that she has given you something, and that the thing she has given you has been costly to her, and that she has given it without making any fuss about the cost, in the way the old women of fashionable London have always done their giving. You think about Hampshire for the first time today. You think about the parsonage where you grew up, the low rooms, the smell of old books in your father's study, the sound of the church bell at the bottom of the lane. You think about your mother. You think about your father. You think about how strange it will be, in another month, to go back home and to find Hampshire smaller than you left it, because you will have seen London now, and you will know that the village that contained your whole childhood is in fact one small village in a very large world. The thought is not unhappy. The thought is, in some way, a relief. You will go back to Hampshire when the time comes, but you will go back changed. You blow out the candle on the night table. The room is now in darkness except for the last red glow of the coals in the grate. You settle deeper into the pillows. The image that comes up last, as you drift, is the Prince Regent's carriage in the late afternoon. The dark red and gold, the matched horses with their silver-mounted harness and their white plumes, the heavy man in his blue coat embroidered with gold, the laughter of the Marchioness of Hertford, the processional pace, the air of absolute authority and assumption, the sense that everything in London exists because the Prince Regent allows it to exist, that power, that beauty, that sad command. You hold the image for a moment, then you let it go. It dissolves into the darkness of the room. And there, you sleep deeply and dreamlessly, tired from the long day of walking and observing and learning.